All right, good morning, everybody. It is 8:30. We'll go ahead and get our fiscal committee meeting here underway. We've got just 9 items before us. Jumping right in here, we've got item number 1 is a resolution recognizing West Michigan Trails and Greenways Coalition as a local civic organization. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Support.
All right, moved and supported. Do we have anyone here in the audience? Do you want to come up to the podium and share a few thoughts? Welcome.
Thank you so much.
If you can hit the little button on the microphone.
Right on the microphone. Yep. There you go.
I'm Jennifer Antal. I'm the program manager at West Michigan Trails, and thank you for considering this today. We are a nonprofit in the area. We work with non-motorized trails in an 18-county region, focused, of course, so many of the trails here in West Michigan. We are in Grand Rapids. We are looking to get a lottery license so that we can and support. And we also take donations and sponsorships as well.
Great, thanks. Just curiosity, if a local business wanted to partner with this program, where might they find information on that?
So all the information is on the city's website at www.grandrapidsmi.gov/grow1000.
Cool, love it.
Or you can just call.
For that. Awesome. All right, any questions or comments, colleagues?
No, just I'm grateful that the program is still rolling. What is 2020 we started this?
Yes.
Yep.
I think, yeah.
In the
2020.
summer of 2020, and
I
that was
remember
hard.
being on the Sunday afternoon phone call.
And people often ask, why is it Grow 1000? And it's because that summer, the community said, we're going to try to employ 1,000 youth.
Yep.
That didn't happen, especially with the pandemic and things being shut down. But we did achieve our goal of being over 1,000 last year.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. Any other comments? All right, hearing none. I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Item number 3, we've got a resolution accepting an $8,000 grant on executing an agreement with the Michigan College Access Network for summer melt programming.
So moved.
Support.
All right, moved and supported.
And I'm here on Ms. Harris's behalf. She's on a well-deserved vacation. And this is a grant from the Michigan College Access Network, the Summer Melt to Summer Success Program grant. This is run through the T2C studios, so Ms. Gina Peters is the coordinator there. And this provides some event opportunities throughout the summer for young persons who are transitioning into college, as well as those to make sure that they get there. There's a lot of statistics that say there's some fall off during the summer months, even for those who might be enrolled. So it's really important to keep youth engaged. Those who may not be going just yet or have made that decision, it also helps to encourage them to get enrolled into college as well.
Awesome, thanks. Any questions, comments, colleagues? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Bohach. Item number 4, we've got a resolution approving a contract amendment to the existing contract with City of Rest to increase funding in the amount of $55,000 for support of community-based violence reduction in the 3rd Ward.
So moved.
Support.
All right, moved and supported.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Morning.
I can cover this one this morning. This is part of our 2022 participatory budgeting initiative. So the 3rd Ward residents supported the implementation of this community-based violence reduction initiative. It was aimed at specific needs of the ward, and City of Rest was awarded the contract under our participatory budgeting program at the project to execute the Grace Criminal Justice Diversion program. So this is an additional $55,000 of funds that will be allocated from already appropriated participatory budgeting funds for this purpose. The work on this project has already begun, and it's anticipated to continue through December of 2026.
Okay, thanks. Questions or comments, colleagues? Anything from my 3rd Ward?
yes.
Go ahead.
This is a great program that they're doing at City of Rest, and I appreciate Pastor Gaddy for what he's been doing in the community. Just wondering, what was the initial amount that City of Rest was awarded, and then where did the extra come from to increase their funding amount?
I can certainly look that up and get back to you on that.
Okay.
I do apologize. I was hoping Mr. Matthews would be able to address that this morning.
No worries.
Oh, thank you.
How much?
150,000.
150,000 initially? Okay, so this,
35,000 was appropriated for that specific project, so that's where the extra $55,000 comes from.
so the extra 55 was, where did,
Already appropriated.
Would you mind coming up to the microphone and sharing that? No, that's okay.
Sorry.
Thank you. Appreciate the information. Just want everyone to be able to hear it.
Sorry, I track
That's
this
all right.
stuff. So,
That's all right.
the initial award was $150,000 for City of Rest, and like Scott had noted, there was $205,000 appropriated through the participatory budgeting process for that specific crime reduction project in the third ward. So the extra 55 is just appropriating that additional 55 to that contract.
so that was left over, or,
No, the original contract was for 150,000.
okay,
So they're just amending it to add the extra 55.
right. I guess I was saying, was the 55 already awarded somewhere else, or was
No.
that just extra?
That was extra.
Okay, okay, thank you.
And I believe I saw on the agenda, correct me if I'm wrong, some of that came from the Third Ward Equity Fund?
No,
No?
no.
Okay.
This was all from the
Disregard.
participatory budgeting
Okay, okay.
process, yeah.
All right.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, it's okay. Thanks for the clarity on that.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions, comments? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. Item number 5, we've got a resolution approving one change order to the contract between High Street IT Solutions LLC and the City of Grand Rapids in an amount not to exceed $577,000.
So move.
Support?
All right, moved and supported.
And I can address this one as well.
Great.
As you said, this is a change order. We had planned to go live on our new ERP system on April 1st. Unfortunately, as we were approaching that go-live date, we had to make a go, no-go decision on that date, and it was becoming clear that the risk was just too great to proceed on April 1st. Specifically, the areas of concern included payroll and our grants and capital projects module. So together with High Street, we agreed that May 1st was a better and the most feasible option really for both sides. In addition, in order to ensure the successful transition on the payroll side, High Street agreed to extend post-go-live support for payroll from 2 to 3 payroll cycles. So that was a concession on their part. So basically, this change order addresses 3 things overall. First, it changes the go-live date to May 1st for both the HR and finance modules. It increases the post-go-live support for payroll administration. And then third, it also addresses some change in scope and a new go-live date for the budget module. So of the total $577,233 of that is going to be paid from existing appropriation in our FMS fund. And then the remainder, we do have sufficient budget and fiscal services, contractual services for the remaining 344.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate you mentioning that because I know every time we see a big number like that, people wonder where the money's coming from. But to reiterate, yes,
Absolutely.
this is money that's already budgeted. It does not require any sort of budget amendment. And yeah, as I've said many times, this project is super important to see through and make sure it happens successfully and efficiently. So looking forward to, within a couple weeks, actually having it be live. So
Very quickly.
appreciate the information there. Any other comments or questions on this one, colleagues?
Commissioner, just one question.
Sure.
I know High Street, of course, is just one important component of the overall Oracle Financial System Management project, but do we have a number of the total costs in totality for the entire project?
Yeah, I do actually. So in total, we're basically approaching, we're in the $12 to $13 million range at this point for the entire project. So again, a very large, to the Commissioner's point, very important and critical project. So of that, approximately $12.5 million, about $7.5 at this point is to High Street. Oracle, we're looking at about $1.3 million. ADP, $15,000. SimPro, $116,000. And then you may recall recently we had to do an extension with CGI, our current provider, and that was approximately $1.6 million. So that's the general overall breakdown of the project.
I appreciate the transparency.
You're welcome.
Yeah, good question. Thanks for that. Okay, All right, hearing no other questions, I will call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the motion carries. That will bring us to item number 6. We've got our salary ordinance amending section 3.2 of ordinance 2022-40. This is a new classification for benefits analyst role.
So moved.
Support.
All right, moved and supported. Good morning, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Mike Osterbaum. I'm the Employee Benefits Manager for the City of Grand Rapids. And this morning, we're asking for City Commission approval to create a new benefits analyst position. This was approved by the Civil Service Board during their March meeting. And the purpose of this position is just to streamline HR service delivery in a more efficient and effective way.
Okay, thanks. Any questions, colleagues? All right, I'm just curious, was there any specific feedback given by civil service, or was it a pretty unanimous?
Yeah,
support for this?
definitely unanimous, and they
Okay.
definitely see the need for this position.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. All right, well, hearing nothing else, I will call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, it carries. Thanks. Item number 7, we've got our bid list resolution for April 15th, 2025.
So moved.
Support.
All right, moved and supported.
Good morning again, Commissioners. We have 16 items on our bid list today, and most of which are just a standard routine operational nature, but happy to address any questions there might be.
Yep, I'll just point out if someone wants to read through all those, that begins on page 17 of our agenda packet. So, questions or comments, colleagues? All righty. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That carries. 2 items left here. We've got number 8, our comptroller's warrant report for the period of March 11, 2025 through March 24, 2025. And that's the amount of $33,543,231.30, and our monthly travel report.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Morning.
I'd like to just first start out and recognize we have Desiree Kirkland here with us this morning. Desiree is our new Deputy City Comptroller. She's joining us from the City of Lansing, where she led finance and accounting operations and the annual audit for the City of Lansing for many years, and very excited to have her on board here at the City of Grand Rapids to bring that experience and leadership here. So just wanted to give her a formal welcome, and she'd love to meet everyone up here if you have a chance to say hello today. So.
Awesome.
Just jumping into the report now, for the warrant report, cash payments were released totaling $33.5 million. That amount includes approximately $5.5 million for employee payroll expense and $1,013,000 approximately for income tax warrants during that period. In terms of quantity, 8,072 income tax refunds were issued, and 1,319 checks and electronic payments were issued. And as stated in the memo, Commissioners, these funds were issued not by anyone in the City Comptroller's office, and were not issued in accordance with the terms in the city charter. The second report I have for you here this morning is our fiscal year-to-date travel report that details travel spend by each city department. Scrolling down here real quick, that report is showing that we've spent approximately $1.1 million of a total approximately $3.4 million budget, or 32% of that so far through the fiscal year. And that concludes the reports that I have this morning.
Okay, thanks. Any questions or comments, colleagues?
Just, you said we spent 32%, you said? So are we on track with that budget, or?
That would indicate that we're significantly underspent in the amount that was budgeted for those particular items.
Okay.
All right. Great. Well, thank you for that. We will receive and file that report. And that'll bring us to our last item. We've got our treasurer's report for a period of March 8th, 2025 through April 2nd of 2025.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's great to be back. It really is. Looking at the report for today, one thing I will say is that we are still working through a lot of things in our economy. As you see in the nightly news and your reports you see and things that get sent to you, there's still a lot of turmoil in the market. There's still a lot of turmoil in the economy. Taking a kind of a quote or axiom from Commissioner Knight, it's day 85. It's day 85. it takes time for these things to be put in place. It takes time for businesses to reshore into the country, to begin building manufacturing or services. There's so many ups and downs right now. We can look at the news in every which way and direction that it makes your head spin. It's just dizzy. And really, my intention is to not go deep into that. My intention is to say, we are stable. We have a great investment program. It's earning fixed income interest. It is in high-quality investments in U.S. Treasuries, U.S. agencies, municipal bonds, and commercial paper. It's designed to be able to weather financial storms. That is what that program is designed to do. We earn interest for all of the different departments. If you, as I was explaining to one commissioner, think of the Treasurer's Office as a bank. Each department has a bank account, and each department with a fund balance is our customer. We take their fund balance and we invest that to earn interest for those departments on those excess funds that allows them to have more money to do the work that they need to do. And that's important for us. That's the important aspect of what we do. What Levi Bolt, our investment officer, does when we look at the pooled cash that the city has and we're making those investments and we're actually looking at what the financial future looks like to make sure that we have the liquid funds available to do our operations, but also plan for the future and have some reserve funds out there longer to match debt service payments and payroll and significant things that are coming down the pipeline. It's hard not to get caught up in the news. It's hard not to get caught up in the rhetoric that's going on from all sides. It's not just one side, it's all sides. It's too easy to do that in social media. It's too easy to do that in many different forms of communication. One of the things that I like to bring forward, though, is how do we weather these turbulent times? We have to be very mindful of the fiscal responsibility that the city has, what our charter entails are our essential services. We really have to challenge ourselves to be better, to really be better, to be the best at financial management. And with that, we talk about the large projects that we have going on or have gone on. And my question always comes that we start with a number and that number always seems to grow. And I know you've experienced that in your time on this with this body, on this dais, as you see things happen in stages where we aren't good projectors of what that final project cost is going to be. And I think many of us know that as we're doing this, if we're building a house and the contractor tells us it's going to be $200,000 to build that home, we would have some heartburn if all of a sudden it's $250,000. That's what happens with some of these large projects. And so we really have to be careful that we know the full cost going in, and we hold the line that some of this stuff has got to be some accountability and transparency as to why these costs continue to increase. Those are things that we really have to be mindful of because we just are bonding for the amphitheater, Scribner, a soccer stadium, more things that are coming down the pipeline that you're going to be asked to bond for. And I really want to make sure that we're mindful of where does this fit in our whole plan if we do hit turbulent times. The markets right now, the interest rate projections, the market participants are going about saying there should be 3 or 4 interest rate cuts, but that's not what the Fed is projecting right now. The Fed is projecting we need to see the data before we start moving our rates. And so we've got that working against us right now in rates. So we're seeing our long-term interest rates have been spiking up. That's going to be more expensive for us to bond. And so that's another thing that we have to go back and relook at the financials of these different projects to see whether or not we're going to be upside down in any way, or or it puts more pressure on the long-term financing, because we're financing these projects for 30 years at a higher cost. So we need to look at when would we be available to refund those bonds, because a lot of times we'll do those like 10 years in to get a lower interest rate, and some of that has to be built into the projections. But it really is important for us to say, with the city's investment portfolio in our department, what we do, It's stable. We have those funds invested in very safe, secure instruments that are earning a good interest rate. We have $684 million in funds right now. The purchase yield is 3.3%. We state that it's the purchase yield because that yield will move as the market moves. We're actually earning more than that, but that's not something, that would take you so far into the weeds with how investments work. I don't want to do that. It's easier to just state the purchase yield. But we are earning a significant amount of money in interest right now, and it's valuable. It's really valuable to these projects. And as we bond, we take drawdown schedules from the projects and we invest it so that it's available when the projects need it. So if you think about a $100 million soccer stadium over 2 years' time, we might be able to get another $2 to $3 million worth of interest that could then go to help that project pay off debt, pay off or be used in the project financing. So that's the valuable work that Mr. Bolt and I aspire to do, is to make sure that we can have that impact, and it's really behind the scenes. That's the importance of our work.
Yeah, thanks for that. I appreciate the point you made too of, I think unfortunately over the past several years, people have come to expect cost increases in our personal lives and construction and things like that. But it is important to not let that become, an excuse, and continue to ask questions when we see increases to make sure that we're not just accepting them at face value in every situation. So very wise words in that regard, I think. Any other questions or comments or follow-ups on that?
I appreciate that description that you gave, helping people really understand where we are and what things look like, although we still don't know what things look like. And putting that in perspective when we're thinking about all of these projects, right, that are coming before us, and then how do we make decision on if we're going to vote on them positively or negatively, whatever that might be, for the time. And the unfortunate piece is, we just don't know day to day. I mean, it's hard to predict a year now, right? If we can just get through the week, we're doing real good. We can, rest on Friday, maybe. So I definitely would like to continue to stay on top of that and what that looks like, especially with our investments and helping our community and constituents understand how that's impacting us as a city. Because I think even though we're trying to look at the positive, we also got to look at what that other side is, right? And really think about, okay, if this does happen, how are we going to move to make sure that we're protecting our community members and our assets the best that we can. So thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
The
thanks,
rest is on Sunday, right?
That's right.
All righty. Cool. Well, hearing no other questions or follow-ups on that, we'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting at 8:55 in the morning, and then we will see many of you back in here at 9:15 for community development.
now 9:16. I'm going to go ahead and call this Community Development Committee to order. Good morning, everyone. We have a number of items on our agenda today, so let's go ahead and get started. First, item number 1 is a resolution approving a fireworks discharge permit for Pyrotech Special Effects, Inc. for indoor special effects at the Van Andel Arena in connection with Shine Down North America 2025 on April 28, 2025.
So moved.
Support. Moved and supported. Fire Marshal Brown?
Fire Marshal, oh, I got a raise.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm giving everybody promotions today, apparently.
Thank you, I
so.
appreciate it. Yeah, just a small one this time, but
I have a couple here.
no real concerns. We'll probably be doing fire watch for it, though.
Okay. Any question, colleagues, regarding this permit? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next is item number 2, a resolution approving a fireworks discharge permit for Pyrotechnico for indoor special effects at the Van Andel Arena in connection with Kane Brown on May 9th and 10th, 2025.
So moved.
Support. Moved and supported?
Okay, smaller version, but
Okay.
still kept safe.
Okay. Hopefully I said that artist name right, or I'm sure I'll be trolled later. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next is a resolution awarding a contract with Windemuller Electric, Inc. for City Archives and Record Center East Building Solar Power Array in the amount of $349,800 with a total amount not to exceed $544,045.
So moved.
Mr. Berkman?
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
So this project will install a solar power array on the east roof of our city archives and record center that's located at 223 Washington Street Southeast. The roof was replaced last year with this in mind, so the readiness was part of that project to accommodate the array. The system is estimated to have a payback period of 20 years with an overall return on investment of 28%, an offset equivalent of 1.3 million gallons of gas consumed. Windemuller Electric provided that low bid amount that was read of $349,800, which was under the engineer's estimate of almost $432,000. So seeking your approval of the award to Windemuller with the that total amount not to exceed of $544,045 coming from the Capital Improvement Fund.
Thanks for highlighting the fund. Any questions for Mr. Berkman?
Could you highlight just briefly how many panels that will be? How many kilowatt hours, et cetera?
Yeah, so the roof square footage is about 20,000 square feet, about half an acre. How that translates to panels, I don't know offhand, but I can get you that.
Yeah, it's more of a curiosity, and because I think it's a larger discussion in the community, the idea of how many flat roofs and the structures of roofs when we're building them, how to make sure we're looking forward to the future for putting in arrays and all the other alternative energy sources that we could be thinking about.
Sure.
Thanks. So it sounds like we'll follow up with that item. Thank you, Mr.
Yeah, I can let
Berkman.
you know that.
Any other questions, colleagues? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 4 is a resolution awarding a contract with Miller Pipeline LLC for replacement of lead service lines at various locations, contract 2025-2 in the amount of $2,941,498.50 with a total project cost not to exceed $3,536,000.
So moved.
Support.
Thank you. So this is the second contract of 2025. The project consists of an estimated 367 full lead service line replacements, so from the water main to the meter, putting back copper water services. Work under this contract will be on the city's south side, looking to begin this spring with completion in 2026. Miller provided that low bid amount that was read of just over $2.9 million, which was under the engineer's estimate of $3.4 million. So this is also one of 4 projects to be funded through a drinking water revolving fund loan through the state of Michigan, which is estimated at $19 million. Of that, an estimated $4 million is eligible for principal forgiveness. So request your approval of the award to Miller with that total authorized amount not to exceed of $3,536,000 coming from that DWRF funding source as well as the Water System Fund.
Colleagues, questions for Mr. Berkman?
Just out of curiosity, do you know how much of that $19 million where the state receives for us is federal funding?
I don't. That could be another follow-up that I could provide with you unless
Especially if with
Mr. Jernberg
extra
knows.
projects coming, 104. It's great that we have a fund like that set aside, and it's always, as we go through our budgeting process, the public might need a reminder that we always try to figure out where the money's coming from when we put projects together. So that's why you say it's the drinking water fund that we're getting the money from, $4 million for forgiveness potentially.
Looks like we've
I got an answer coming.
I don't know if I have a complete answer for you. I can tell you this,
Thank you.
that the Drinking Water Revolving Fund does charge interest on the loans that we get. So there is return on investment that the state uses to be able to fund future projects and initiatives. There is still a small portion of the Drinking Water Revolving Fund that is still taking in federal dollars. They used it to supplement it, but a lot of that is pretty much done after fiscal year 26.
Okay, so for right now, status quo.
Yes, status quo.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 5 is a resolution awarding a contract with Dan's Excavating Service for improvements to Ball Perkins Park 2022 in the amount of $382,000 with an amount not to exceed $547,000.
So moved. Support.
Moved and supported. Mr. Marquardt?
Good morning, Commissioners. This is an expansion of a project that took place in 2017 when the Parks Department worked with the Neighborhood Association for some trail connectivity up in Ball Perkins Park. Now we are coming back to add some parking spaces and trail connectivity to that parking, adding some additional trail connections within the wooded area of the park space. And adding some nature-based play pods to the park as well. So we will be constructing this work this next season with completion likely by the end of this year.
Any questions?
Could you describe the play pods that you're imagining?
Yeah, these have been designed to meet our National Recreation and Park Association playground standards. They have some natural wood features similar to what we've done down in Plaster Creek Park and up in Huff Park as well.
So we've got our safety standards.
We do, yep.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for this update. Thanks for talking through the timeline. I know this project has taken some time. 2017 was before I was on commission, but know that there's been a lot of work that you and the department have also worked with our utility, with Consumers Energy, given the location of the park, working with Friends of GR Parks and ensuring that we can get removal of invasive species. So I know that there's been a lot of work going into this, so just wanted to highlight that. Thank you, David.
You're very welcome.
All right, hearing no other questions, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 6 is a resolution approving an agreement with MDOT for the Roto Mill resurfacing of Michigan Street from Maryland Avenue to Leffingwell Avenue and authorizing $1,691,630 for the local share of project costs.
So moved. Support.
Moved and supported. Mr. Berkman?
This project will Roto-Mill resurface about a half-mile segment of Michigan that's located between Maryland and Leffingwell, replacing the existing curb and gutter, replacing driveway approaches, but also we're looking to fill in the north side ditch along the roadway edge there with new storm sewer, enabling us to also install a 5-foot sidewalk along that stretch. Construction is anticipated to begin later this year, tentatively looking at July timeframe for a start, but that's still to be determined with the contractor fully. A $576,000 surface transportation program grant was obtained. Though it's federal aid, so this project is being bid and administered through MDOT, which is why you have the MDOT agreement portion of this resolution before you. Estimated total expenditures for the project are just over $2.2 million, which after the grant results in a local share of that amount that was read of $1.69 million. So seeking your authorization of that amount for our local share, which will come from the Vital Streets Fund, as well as approval of that MDOT agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Berkman. Questions, colleagues? And this project is already underway, or portion of this project?
This one will start,
Okay.
they're looking at probably right after the 4th of July, but
Okay.
that's still to be determined.
So right now, it's Maryland and Leonard. There was some utility work that was happening, I think.
I think so,
Okay.
yeah.
Gotten a lot of calls about it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, hearing no other questions, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 7 is a resolution approving an increase in scope and authorization of $766,660 for replacement of variable frequency drives at Market Avenue Pump Station for a total not to exceed $1,118,900.
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported?
So variable frequency drives, or VFDs, adjust the frequency and voltage, so adjust the power that go to run our pumps and pump stations, and that allows us to run them more efficiently, save energy, reduce stress on the motor. At the Market Avenue Pump Station, there are 4 pumps and subsequently 4 VFDs to drive those. And that pump station handles a significant portion of our north and west service area that's pumped then to the Water Resource Recovery Facility. So it's significant critical infrastructure. The existing VFDs have exceeded their useful life and cannot be rebuilt. So in November of 2023, we awarded this contract to initially replace just one of those VFDs, or VFD number 1, the first slot. In the time frame of leading up to construction, VFD 2 actually failed, and so we directed the contractor, of course, to instead replace that one. But with the age of the remaining 3 VFDs and the probability and consequence of failure, given their criticality, we already have a contractor in place who was the only bidder for this work and came in $40,000 under the original engineer's estimate. They understand the site conditions, and as a result, we're able to secure a reduced unit price for the remaining 3 VFDs. So we'd like to increase their contract, increase the authorization to accommodate the scope to now replace the remaining 3. That would require an increase in expenditures in the amount of $766,660, which would come from the sewer system fund.
Any questions for Mr. Berkman?
I would just like to note that it was a pleasure to be able to join the water department at the waste recovery facility and see how some of these, and we did talk about these kinds of pumps and how they are very critical and very difficult, especially with age, that they're not being replacement parts and things like that. So is there anything the water department would like to add to what Mr. Berkman has shared today? No? Okay, just wanted to check. But yeah, this is critical infrastructure. We need to continue to have all our pump stations work and do the critical work that the city does best.
Any other questions? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next is item number 8, which is a resolution approving an increase of $164,979 for the preventative maintenance of Pearl Street Bridge over the Grand River, Burton Street Bridge over Grand Elk Railroad, and Hall Street Bridge over Grand Elk Railroad.
So moved.
Support. Moved and supported. Mr. Berkman?
Yes, on March 11th, you approved the agreement with MDOT for this project involving preventative maintenance work over these 3 bridges, work like substructure repairs, an epoxy overlay, sealer, some curb and gutter replacement, deck and sidewalk patching. Work on Pearl Street Bridge actually started yesterday, and then we'll move on to the other 2 once they complete that work. The project includes $957,000 in grant funding through MDOT, so again, it was administered and bid through MDOT. The authorized local match from that March 11th item of $410,000 was based on an estimated total project cost. Bids were subsequently received and did come in higher than estimate. The low bid was just under $1.2 million, which was about $440,000 over the estimate. The second and only other bidder was over $2.1 million, so another $915,000 higher. So we believe in the low bid price and want to move forward with this, but we need to close that gap. So seeking your approval to increase the authorization of $164,979, which would be our local share, augmented again by the MDOT grant. Our local share would come from the Vital Streets Fund.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Berkman?
What do you think is the increase that we're seeing in these bids? I mean, I'm glad we have one that's relatively in the ballpark, but what do you think's going on?
So in particular, the work on the Pearl Street Bridge is going to require what they call an over-under approach. So they've got to go out over the edge of the river, come down and come under the bridge to patch and do some of the repair work on the underside. And that's where we saw a pretty significant per square foot or per square yard, area unit price increase. And so comparing that though to the next highest, next and only other bidder, which was much higher, believe that the price is appropriate, but that's largely what drove the increase over the engineer's estimate.
I did drive through there today on my way in, and I was surprised by it, but only because I'm not aware of everything going on at every minute of every day. I'm sure all of us are the same. And it looks like it's actually progressing pretty well. Do you know how long it's going to take for these bridges?
Yeah, so on Pearl, they're working currently on the south side, so traffic is shifted to the north. So we're maintaining one lane of travel in each direction. It's estimated to take about 4 weeks per side, and then they'll be able to open it up. Then there needs to be a period of time that elapses before they can put the sealer on, so they'll have to return. But that duration should be much, much shorter. But looking at 8 weeks for this initial work, that'll again require 2 lanes to be closed, but we'll maintain 1 lane in either direction.
And then they'll move to the other bridges?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And as we talk about all these construction projects, would it be possible to get like a 30,000-foot view of like where in the city everything's going on?
Well, that's something that the city's working on in terms of developing our project hub. The initial launch was talked about at Commission Night Out at your last meeting, focusing on 6 projects, but looking to grow that to be able to have a more easily digestible, kind of ready at your fingertips method of being able to understand and see what all is going on. Those are pieces that we already have in place today, but they're not as user-friendly or readily accessible. And so looking to combine those. So this year we're focusing on having, that available for the 6, but with the idea of growing that to be everything, but we're just still in the development stages of that. But we do try to keep up with information on our city website. Folks can always call 311. There's, information about every project available with scripts there. Then they can ultimately be put in touch with the engineering department as well, and we're happy to follow up with residents.
Thank you.
I'll add neighborhood associations, corridor improvement authorities often will share in newsletters or social media posts.
Right.
To be mindful and I think have a pretty dialed in, at least the ones I'm a part of with Juan and others in the department.
Right.
Thank you. Any other questions? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 9 is a resolution approving an increase of $37,620 for city-county complex lighting system upgrades for a total not to exceed $289,440.
So moved.
Support.
So the city awarded this contract in November of last year to upgrade the building lighting control system for both City Hall and the Kent County Administration building next door. The current system is no longer supported due to age and was in need of replacement. And this will bring all the controls to current standards, reconfigure lighting zones to reflect recent renovations within the 2 facilities. During the installation that's underway, there were some areas noted in the county building's 2nd and 3rd floors that didn't have any controls. So the scope increase will add new panels, a new control system and sensor to these areas, incorporating them into the overall building management system. So seeking your approval to increase the contract amount with High Point Electric in the amount of $34,117 with total expenditures not to exceed $289,440. That financing will come from the Facilities Management Fund. There is a city-county split associated with projects like this. It's roughly 2/3 city, 1/3 county. I don't have those exact percentages, but it's pretty close, and I see Facilities Director Prince shaking his head.
Let it be noted for the record.
Yes.
Questions, colleagues?
I have a question.
Yes.
So the split, is that based on ownership of the buildings? Can you tell me more about that?
Mr. Prince?
I see Mr. Prince coming. He can
Making his
probably
way up.
better explain the history behind that and how that number was derived.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, that split was derived, we look at the square footage that both buildings own, and then we share the infrastructures with the buildings. So, you know, the power, the maintenance, the contracts, everything else, so it's basically done on square footage.
Okay.
And Tim said, yeah, it's like 37.1% or something like that. So any projects that we do in combination with the county, they share about a third of the costs.
So because it's utility related, it's divvied up like that. And if anything specific to City Hall, which we own, it's 100% us. And then I'm assuming they own fully the county building.
They do. From the plaza up, they own that portion of the building. From the plaza up, we own this portion. Then we share the Monroe, the tunnel. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. And then to answer your question, Belcheck, is 217 panels on the Clark solar roof. So I think it's 138 kilowatts, if I'm mind. So
Thank you very much.
oh, you're welcome.
Yeah,
Thanks.
there's an
Thanks for
extra
that
seat open.
Nope, you're still going to have the majority of items, Mr. Perkman. All right, hearing no other question, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 10 is a resolution approving an increase of $3 million for construction materials testing services for various projects for a total authorized amount of $7 million.
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported. Mr. Berkman?
So we have term agreements in place with 4 consulting firms to provide services like soil borings and testing, construction materials testing, so when we're testing pavement cores or concrete samples, also hazardous materials testing, so things like asbestos that we check in our building renovation projects. Those are as-needed agreements that we then seek your authorization for a total cap, and we bill against that to individual project budgets, and when we come up against or near that ceiling, we come back to you like I am today requesting an authorization increase. So it's difficult to project over 3 years or beyond how many of these services we'll need because they're very project specific and they're driven by the scope and nature of the projects. But we're now approaching the previously authorized authorization limit that was set at $4 million, and with the forecasted workload and upcoming projects, we'd like to increase that amount to make sure there's available resources for upcoming projects. Some of the bigger ones that have hit against this projects, of course, like 1500 Scribner, the Ash Lagoon remediation project down at the Water Resource Recovery Facility, Fire Training Center. Those in and of themselves totaled about $2.3 million utilized of these services. So with that, would request your approval of this increase of $3 million to our as-needed construction materials and testing services agreements.
Any questions for Mr. Berkman?
How long is this authorization for?
So the agreements were originally approved in 2020. They had a 3-year term. So in 2023, they were again approved for a 2nd-year term. That's common for what we do with as-needed professional services. So coming up later this year, prior to their expiration in January of 2026, we will go back out for another solicitation seeking qualifications from firms that do this work. I'll note when we did this in 2020, we sent the RFQ out to our database of firms, which included over 180 firms. 4 submitted on this, and those are the 4 that we have under contract.
That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Our last item is item number 11, which is a resolution setting Tuesday, April 29th, 2025 at 7 p.m. as the date the City Commission will convene a public hearing to sit as Board of Review to hear appeals.
So support.
Moved and supported. Ms. Jessifer?
Good morning. I'm Paula Jessifer. I'm the city assessor. In January, the City Commission ordered me to create a special assessment nuisance roll of unpaid charges for services or code violations that occurred from July through December. And this is a requirement of our city charter that the City Commission sits as the Board of Review to hear those appeals. So this is setting the date for the public hearing.
Any questions?
Question, Madam Chair, a similar item came before us in maybe January, February, sometime this year?
So in January was the hearing on necessity, and that was the proceeding to give me the direction to create the roll of the unpaid charges. So property owners were mailed a notice on March 20th that outlined the amount of the charge, what it was for, what it was stemming from, and the appeal process. So property owners can file an appeal directly with our office, or they can come to you on that date. And that date, April 29th, will be the last date that they can file an appeal. These charges, once confirmed by the City Commission, will then be put on the tax notice on July 1st.
Thank you. Madam Chair, when we first talked about this in the way that she described, we talked about wanting a presentation at some point to dig more into how we handle nuisance and code violations, patterns we might see in any process or operational improvements, particularly in the name of ensuring that there's fairness across the system. Do you have a sense of when that might come before us?
If I recall, I think that item was probably back to the committee as a whole. But I'm happy to follow up with the city manager or Ms. Behrens if you have a thought about that review process. Or I think with Ms. Jasper as the one leading, the review, I want to make sure we're talking to all the appropriate parties.
Sure, I can coordinate with the manager and get back to you on the venue and timing. Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Madam Chair, just out of curiosity, have we received any appeals at this time that we're anticipating?
I believe we have 3, last I checked, but they can file an appeal all the way up to April 29th. So.
And including, showing up at the meeting, or do they have to have filed paperwork?
No, they can show up at the meeting, and then we can take the appeal then.
Very good, thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Thank you for that follow-up. Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. With that, that concludes our Community Development Committee meeting at 9:42.
hit the mic. Committee of the Whole will come to order, and I would like to start by moving myself to the microphone to read a proclamation for Arbor Day.
I think Mr. David Marquardt, on behalf of the Parks Department, and Joe Sulak are here to receive the proclamation.
So I'll read this into the record. Oh, that mic down there. With the microphone on. Whereas our urban forest is a vital community asset that benefits all citizens, and whereas our urban forest provides important ecosystem and green infrastructure services, and therefore plays a critical role in achieving the city's sustainability Green Grand Rapids urban forest plans, and whereas our urban forest enhances the quality of life and attractiveness of our city, providing a competitive edge in retaining and attracting residents and businesses, and whereas our urban forest provides important economic benefits, including reducing energy costs, increasing property values, reducing demand for stormwater management, and strengthening the economic vitality of our business and commercial districts, and whereas our urban forest provides vital environmental benefits, including improving air and water quality, providing life-giving oxygen, and providing wildlife habitat. And whereas our urban forest provides important physical and psychological health benefits, including reducing stress, respiratory illness, and symptoms of attention deficit. Now therefore, I, David LeGrand, Mayor of Grand Rapids, proclaim April 25th, 2025 as Arbor Day. And I would like to add that if I had thought of it when I was drafting this resolution, I probably would have added that trees have the added advantage of protecting pedestrians from car accidents. Over the years, we've taken all obstacles out of the way on highways so that cars can safely drift off the highway if they have problems. But unfortunately, in cities, that doesn't work because places cars drift are where the pedestrians are. So trees are an important pedestrian protection mechanism too on our streets.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Commissioners, for this recognition and proclamation. To celebrate this Arbor Day, Friends of Grand Rapids Parks, in cooperation with the City of Grand Rapids, will be hosting a tree planting on April 25th and 26th of 2025. The location will be down in the neighborhoods of Boston Square and Oakdale neighborhoods. Together, again, with the city, we will be planting about 250 trees over the course of those 2 days. There will also be 50 trees that will be given away to the general public as a part of that event, and we encourage you to participate in that for all of the reasons that the mayor listed in the proclamation today. We're so grateful for the support, both of our tree planting efforts, but also our tree care efforts as well.
Can we get a picture with
Sure.
Ms. Marquardt, maybe the commission?
Okay, probably everyone on the commission likes trees, so why don't we all go up and take the picture? Yeah, come on in. Yeah, please.
Trying to hide. Oh.
Okay.
Ready? Okay. 1, 2, 3.
See trees.
Trees. Lovely. Thank you. Thank you for your enthusiasm. Somebody had to bring it today.
It's like cheese.
Moving on to our next item, we have a resolution recommending approval by the MLCC of a social district permit applications pursuant to Act 124 of 2020. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Support.
Any discussion? Mr. Clerk?
Yeah, just so you're aware, this is in the social downtown Grand Rapids social district. We have several social districts, but one of them is downtown Grand Rapids, and this is for 3 permits in that district. The Garden District Hospitality at 55 Monroe, W.B. Blanton Enterprises doing businesses like Macaron at 132 Monroe Center, and Night Watch GR LLC at 201 Fulton Street, Unit 3.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. That brings us to our next resolution. This is to approve Commissioner Belchick's request to attend the Michigan Community Action Summer 2025 Conference, and there's a fee associated with this, and we all have to approve that. So do I have a motion?
So moved.
Support.
Any discussion?
I'll just mention, since it is my item, that this is an item, the conference is here in town. This is an early bird fee, so it is reduced. This was put forth to me by the Kent County Community Action Committee, upon which I sit for the governing board. And so it looked like a good opportunity to continue to learn, network, and help expand the outreach that we can do.
Great. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Next, that brings us to resolution authorizing certain special events. Do I have a motion?
Support.
Mr. Clerk?
Ms. Pittman's got it.
Great.
Good morning. This resolution identifies certain special events that are planned to occur during the 2025 year. It's not inclusive of all events, as we do get special event permit applications all year long. And as those come in, I'll bring them back before Commission for approval. All events that are approved will have an event action plan as well as insurance.
Thank you. Any questions, commissioners? No?
Do we have an estimate of what special events so far or projected that you're hearing about, especially with the 175th anniversary?
Absolutely. So in our attachment, I believe it was attachment A, we do have a list of the special events that are currently on file with us, meaning that they've either put in a reservation or an application. There's many cultural festivals as well as celebrations that are adding the 175th information to their event.
And if you're a public member, how will they find out about these events? What's a good way?
So there's a couple of ways that folks can find out about events that are permitted through our office. We have an events and activities page on the city's website that folks can go to. We're also partnering with Experience Grand Rapids, and they list all events that are occurring in West Michigan, and they have a special link for events that are associated with the 175th anniversary.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or discussion? Great, thanks. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Which brings us to an event we're going to have, I'm sure, more discussion about, and that is a resolution setting, for publication, setting a date to consider proposed ordinance, amending essentially the structure of voting precincts in the city, and to update boundaries of those precincts. And our city clerk has a presentation for us and the public. So, clerk.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. Just to give a background of how we got to this point or got to this request. There were 2 major changes to the Michigan Constitution, one in 2018 and one in 2022. The one of Proposal 3 of 2018 gave a constitutional right to a secret ballot, straight party voting. The big one in there is the no reason absentee voting. Any voter has the right to vote by absentee ballot. And we've seen that really take off since then. Of course, during the pandemic, we really saw it take off during the 2020 presidential election. Automatic voter registration, that means when you go to the Secretary of State's office or do something, you automatically get registered. Same day registration, we used to be, you registered 30 days before an election. Now you can do it up until and including election day. Military and overseas ballots, 45 days, and then right to election audits. In 2022, the voters of Michigan approved, once again said we have a fundamental right to vote. The big one here was early voting. The early voting was the big one, and 2024 was the first time that we saw early voting, and I'll talk a little bit more about what those numbers look like in 2024 and what that means going forward. It also says that if you either have to show a photo ID or you fill out an affidavit. That's been kind of played with in the legislature over the years. Now it's enshrined into the Michigan Constitution. You can have one application for absentee ballots for the rest of your voting life. That's a big change. State paid return postage for AV applications and ballots. That was something that when I came to Grand Rapids, we switched from the voters paying for their postage. We paid for postage for a couple election cycles, and now the state pays for that returned postage. So, which is a savings for the city there. Drop boxes, absentee ballot tracking, military and overseas ballots. If they come in, as long as they're postmarked before Election Day, we can count those up to 6 days after. Allows for private donations. So if there's a foundation out there, some states don't allow private donations to fund elections, but Michigan has that enshrined in the Constitution. So I've received grants over the years, so that allows us to do that. And it says that basically the certification process, they certify. So now looking at the turnout by voting method this is looking at just at November general elections. So you can see for November 24, this is the first time that we had early voting. Out of that 97,677 that voted, I think it was over 60% voted before Election Day. So they either voted early or they voted by absentee. So that means in precinct election turnout has decreased. You can see that compared to 2022 where there was more in precinct. But if you go back to 2016, out of that 85,483 total voters, it was about 16,000 voted by absentee. But that was before no reason. And the like. So you can see, and then of course in 2020 you saw the jump. I think it was like 60,000 that voted by absentee in 2020, but we were in the pandemic as well. So this gives you some more numbers here by method. So for this November 2024 election, 57% of the voters voted before Election Day. So you can see that in the precinct, there was 42,200 that voted in the precinct, about 35,000 voted absentee, and about 20,500 voted early at one of the 4 early voting centers. So when you look at the next set of numbers, November 2016, 901 voters on average went to a precinct on Election Day. Drop that down to November of 2024, that's 571. So you have a lot lower that are going to Election Day. And if you talk to election workers, when you're in that 500 range, that's not a lot of voters coming through the precinct during that day. And then I broke it down a little bit further based on this 2024 election, Ward 1, Ward 2, Ward 3, that you can see where the turnout, so Ward 1 had the lowest overall turnout at 60.32%, Ward 2 at 69%, and Ward 3 at 62%. But you can see that Ward 2 has the highest in all 3 categories, but Ward 3 has about 2,000 more absentee voters. There's a large pocket in Ward 3 where you have Samaritas and Raybrook and the Breton Villages, and Clark Retirement Home. So you have large retirement communities in the 3rd Ward, and those are our, I call them our biggies for absentee voting. So you can see the change in Ward 3 actually had more people participate in early voting than Ward 1 as well. So a couple of other things before we look at the maps is the legislature also changed a law that said, so before the legislature made this change, the maximum amount of voters per precinct was 2,999. The legislature changed that because of early voting and because of absentee. They changed that number to 4,999. So you could have up to 4,999 voters per precinct. If you extrapolate that out, we could go down to 31 precincts. If you took our 152,000 voters, divided by 4,999, you get to 30.5 precincts. I'm not asking for 30.5 precincts. We're asking, we have a different request. So kind of keep that in your mind too, is that the laws changed what those amount of voters per precinct could be. I also waited until after the 2024 election to bring this to the commission and the election commission because I wanted to have data. City of Lansing, they went ahead way before in late 2023 to do this. They went from 40 precincts down to 32, so about the same percentages of what I'm requesting. I think that's about a 20% decrease. So Lansing did it ahead of time. A lot of other cities went ahead without data, thinking what's going to happen. So I wanted to make sure that we had data, saw what turnout was, and we saw that 57% of the voters voted before Election Day. So here's a map of the first ward. So what we're proposing in the first ward is where the blue map where it's precinct 7 and 9, that's a new precinct 7, and they would be voting at the church over by Union High School on Tremont. One of the precincts was at Shawmut Hill, so their polling location wasn't even in their precinct. So this would combine these to get together. The new precinct 2 is former precincts 2 and 5, and they were both in Sibley School. So they're not changing their location. They're staying in the same location. It's just going to be one set of election workers rather than two sets of election workers in there. And then 2 to combine is in the pink color, the reddish color there is the voters that voted at MTech and Cesar Chavez School. They would all vote at Cesar Chavez School. So those are the changes in the first ward. In the second ward, a few changes is most of the changes I have, and I'll show it. In my last slide, will show that it's multiple precincts in a single location that we're combining together is a good majority of what we're asking for in the decreases. The other thing that we're looking at is closing of GRPS buildings and other precincts that are not available. So in the second ward, East Leonard Elementary is no longer available. And then Aquinas didn't really want to be a precinct anymore. So we're looking at how do we combine some things together? How do we move some lines? And so you see some changes kind of where you see precinct 24 in that green and that teal color. It was taking part of the old 27 and part of the north part of the old 28, and they would vote at Fourth Reformed Church, and then the number 27, which is the southern part of 28 and an old 31, I believe. We got a new location, which is going to be Emerald Flats, the old Eastern Elementary. So we've never used that location before. That's an ICCF building. Going to be a great location for a precinct. Great parking, very accessible for people to get into that precinct. And then the other big change in there is if you see precinct 40 in that red color, we split what I call the downtown precinct, so North Monroe downtown. Their polling location was at Coit School. And so I had a lot of complaints from downtown voters. There's about 500 voters that lived in that section, like on Library, in Monroe Center. And there were some complaints about having to go north of 196. It's not walkable. It's not that. So we took the southern part of that precinct and merged it with Ransom Park. So now it's walkable. And of course, we did an early voting site at DeVos Place. So downtown voters had a lot of things, and we're going to be adding probably more downtown voters as people move into the Fifth Third building and various other things too. So this will make it walkable. So that's kind of a big change there. And in the third ward, several changes. We'll start at the very top, that precinct 48, where you see. So that's precinct 50 and precinct 59. Those are very low. They had about 1,200 voters in each one. Combining those together, so we would no longer have voting at Sigsbee School. And as we move down, you can see as we move down, there's some combination of precincts and some changing of locations, but most of them are multiple precinct polling locations. And I'll show you that in the end. And when we went down to the further south, we changed some of the lines so that voters were closer to their location. So like in that 46, they're at Plymouth Church. Instead of going up to Brookside, they're a little bit closer into their neighborhood. The other thing that we had to take into effect as we were drawing these lines was splits by county commission districts. So there's county commission district lines that we took into play as well, so we didn't have any splits. And there's some there's a couple state house splits, and then we have school district splits. School district splits, we can't avoid. There's small parts of all these little precincts, so we're aware of those, but we didn't want to put any precincts together that combine two different county commission districts within a precinct and they have two different ballot styles. So those all things were taken into effect into consideration as we put together this plan. I did bring this to the election commission. The election commission is myself, the city attorney, and the city assessor. We voted unanimously to approve this plan. So here's the two new polling locations, Emerald Flats, it replaces East Leonard Elementary, and then Hub 07, which is in the Amplify GR project. This is going to replace Adam Park's apartment in Boston Square CRC. We got Boston Square CRC as a precinct when Living Word Church closed on Kalamazoo, which was where Hub 07 is now, which was a great location, but they were closing. We're no longer using it. Boston Square CRC had a good room for voting, but the accessibility was not great there. Getting people that had accessible needs, getting them to the polling location, they had to go down a sidewalk and around. And also replacing Adam Park's apartments, which is going to be going under a transformation in the next few years. It's not a very big parking lot, and the parking lot's usually full from the residents that are there. So when outside folks are coming in, and plus the room is not that big, so this would be a good change there. So we were merged like 3 precincts together to go down to 2 precincts there. I think one of the other places that we're also replacing or not using through the combinations is Mulick School. Mulick Park School is not a very accessible building. First of all, the parking lot is down a hill, so if you're in a wheelchair, I've had assist voters before doing curbside voting because they can't get their wheelchair up the hill unassisted, and then when they get in the school, they have to go up a little elevator to get up to the gym. So Mulick Park School has always been kind of problematic for accessibility. So looking at the accessibility of the locations and how we're going to get there, that's how we came up with this plan. So in first ward, multiple precinct polling locations to single precincts. So in first ward, it's Sibley School combining together. In the second ward, Kent Hill School, St. Isidore Church, Westminster Church, Faith Lutheran Church. Those all have 2 precincts that are in that polling location. We're just combining those precincts together. So those voters are not going to a new location. And in the third ward, Brookside Christian Reformed Church, Dickinson School, Seymour CRC, and Our Savior Lutheran Church are all going to be are now single precincts within the location. So none of those voters are moving locations. They're just going to have a new number and in the less there. So that's out of the 15 that we're requesting to be decreased, 9 of them are multiple precincts going down to one location. A couple things before questions on financials. So what does that mean financially? So 15 precincts, staffing is about $20,000 for a general election. And the county has started in 2024 of charging us for programming. So programming the elections is about $900 to $900 or so per precinct to do the programming. And so that's about $13,000 savings in programming. And you're like, okay, we got savings. Well, we also have costs now because of early voting. We didn't have those costs before. In 2024, the state covered the election worker pay for early voting, but we don't know if that's going to be in future budgets. So now we have 9 days of early voting at 3 or 4 locations. That's increased costs. And then clerk overtime is not my overtime. I don't get overtime. Staff overtime of putting staff in the early voting sites. We're talking 9 days, 2 weekends of full day of overtime. So those are additional costs that we didn't have before early voting. And then also having to hire some temporary employees because of the high amount of absentees and the need for drop boxes. We hired temporary workers to go to all the drop boxes to empty those every day, sort the ballots. So there's temporary election costs that we didn't have before when that's the difference between 16,000 absentees and 30 to 50,000 absentees. It's going to be, those are costs that change. Plus, working with an absentee ballot is a lot more staff touches between stuffing a ballot, preparing a ballot for mail. And got to be careful about saying the word stuffing. Preparing the ballot for mail, mailing it out, it comes back, you have to scan it in, check the signature, file it, bring it to an AV counting board, whereas going to a precinct or early voting, we hand you a ballot, you put it through a tabulator, it's done. So there's a lot more costs, but the state picking up the costs on postage coming back saves a bunch. So those are some of the fiscal things that have to do with elections. And then just going from 74 precincts down to 59, the amount of trucks needed and equipment needed and computers for e-poll books, all that stuff extrapolates out over the years as we have to do replacement equipment. And then our voting equipment right now is at, that came into play in 2017. So we're approaching 8 to 10 years now on our election equipment. That talk is starting to happen now about new election equipment. And in the past, we've had money from the Help America Vote Act and from the state, but we don't know if that money's going to be there. So providing new election equipment, at $5,000 to $10,000 per precinct is something not to sneeze at either. So those are all the different factors that come into this plan. So thank you for your time.
Thanks for the summary. Before we get to discussion, I don't think I have a motion yet to consider.
Support.
Thank you. Okay. My fellow commissioners, discussion. I see Commissioner Knight and then Commissioner Robbins, and then we can move from there.
Thank you for this information, Joel. You're generally pretty thorough with all the information you gave. I guess a lot of the questions that you asked or that I had written down to ask, you pretty much answered it. Accessibility was one of the major things that I had for people who are other abled or in wheelchairs or even walking, right? But not realizing how many of these spaces were all in the same room and standing in a long line waiting to get up front to find out you got to go to the other side of the room. People that have jobs and they vote during the day, that kind of thing.
We fast pass those people. So
I truly appreciate that. So I just appreciate you giving more information on this to let us know, because we want to make sure that we're being equitable for our community and making sure that people have access to be able to cast their ballots when necessary. And we know that this last election, was really heavy. And I think the next couple of ones that we have coming up will also be quite vibrant. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Robbins.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Appreciate the information. I think anytime there's a proposed change in voter operations, locations, boundary lines, people rightfully have questions and concerns. But what I'm hearing you say is, I heard you mention more accessibility, more walkability, voting locations that are closer to where people live in their neighborhoods, efficiencies that benefit the voter. I think precincts 2 and 5 in the first ward are a perfect example. I lived in that neighborhood for quite a long time and always wondered why when I would show up to Sibley, there would be 2 different lines for depending on which part of the neighborhood I lived in. So seeing that as an efficiency that can come about from this change, I think is makes a lot of sense. So I guess for anyone else who's tuning in, I'll just say our city clerk, we're fortunate that he's an absolute expert in this space and is renowned throughout the country for his knowledge in how to manage a good voting operation, and also for his voter advocacy. And I trust that there's nothing he would ever recommend to this body that would do anything other than increase the ability for people to be able to exercise their right to vote. So just wanted to make sure that was mentioned.
Thanks. Any other commissioner comments? Commissioner Belcheck.
I'll just echo what my fellow colleague in the first ward said. I actually live in precinct 2 and 5, and I'll be in that new precinct. So it is always good, even though change is hard, to consider how we are providing the best service possible, and government excellence being one of our main core values as a city. I think this is a great example, and I think you've done a great job. I do see there's a lot of precinct changes in Ward 3, so I respect and honor what my colleagues might say about that, but thank you for your hard work.
Commissioner Usasi.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Clerk, for the presentation. Can you, I know you reviewed a number of the internal pieces. Can you also review some of the conversations that you've had? I know this was first discussed
I've been discussing this for a long time.
I think, can you review that timeline and then talk about some of the external parties that you've connected with?
So when early voting first came out, and those of us in clerk world started talking about what is this going to look like when we have, all of our precincts and then early voting and absentee voting at what level can we staff or clerk staff gets burnt out or for preparations? Are we going to do countywide systems? Are we going to do our own systems? What are we going to do? So that was the first step of this. And a lot of cities said, we're moving now. Like Lansing, they're like, we're going now because then for the 2024 elections, we are not going to utilize as many precincts. And so I took a sit and wait and see. So as soon as we started talking that, I already had initial conversation with Kathy Harris, with Proactive, with ACLU, the people that I meet with as zoning board, with the Kent County Republicans. They know that we've been talking about this. So there's a group of people that I talk with on elections, get them together. They can basically, it's an open forum. You ask me any question. Sometimes it's no, sometimes it's yes. How do we get there? I've talked with Mr. Jackson at the NAACP. I'm actually meeting with their board this evening to talk about this and to get their feelings. So I've talked to the new president of the Hispanic Center as well. We talked about it because I'm kind of watching what they're doing with their new space there at the I think it's the Edge Church. Is that a possible precinct location instead of Cesar Chavez? So looking at those partnerships, what are those new locations? What are the new things out there? How is this all going to work? And then the other thing I have to think about is the thing that we have to always think about, and we have these conversations with GRPS, what is that relationship with GRPS as far as polling locations in the schools and school safety and various other things, and with their school consolidation plans and moving, what does that mean for precincts? Because we still have a couple other precincts that are on the future development, like Brookside School and some others. Some of them got stays of execution or for a little bit longer. So we're gonna see what happens with GRPS. But all those things come into effect as we're looking at locations.
And can you confirm I know in the past I talked to Commissioner Repart about sort of the lowest turning out precincts. Are the two lowest still in the first ward?
The two lowest are in the first ward. At Buchanan School, it was. So in this last November election, so you're talking 64% turnout. Mm-hmm. You have some precincts in the city of Grand Rapids that are over 80%. So I think the first ward has the high and the low. Mm-hmm. And so precinct 8, which is LaGrave, which there's a ton of registered voters there because you have Mel Trotter and Degage all inside that precinct. So they register a lot of voters, but then they don't show up. That was 38.21%. Buchanan Elementary is the lowest at 36.96, and the lowest in the third ward. So there's 3 precincts in the city that were under 40%, 2 in the first ward, and then precinct 64 at First Christian Reformed Church, it was 39.96%. So in the first ward, there were 10 precincts that were above the city turnout average. In the second ward, there was 19 precincts that were over the city average. And then in the third ward, there was 14 precincts that were over the city average. And those generally low turnout precincts are generally in our more Latino Hispanic communities.
And you also, I think, shared previously to me that you had spoken with Representative Wooden, who's the vice chair of the Elections Committee for the Michigan Legislature.
Yeah, so we had a conversation, and I know he's been involved in several elections and campaigns as well, and involved in the party as well. So I was trying to get his feel on that, and he's kind of seen where some of this stuff is going election-wise as well. He didn't have any concerns. And I want to say the election partners that I've talked to haven't had any concerns with this plan because I've been talking to them throughout the process.
Thank you. I think, generally, I've heard some of my colleagues share, change is. I'm in the 25-27 precinct right now, and it is, I think, oftentimes confusing to go into a precinct and you're not sure what precinct it is. And so with that new change in terms of the minimum number, those other pieces were ballot proposals with Prop 2 and Prop 3, but the legislature for the minimum standard and the amount of precincts. I also think the next item this body is going to be looking at is the amount of energy and sustainability and climate change as it relates to our community. I don't know what the net positive is of, reducing the number of precincts that we have, but I think some of these buildings would sometimes be closed when we would be hosting our election day. So, another small consideration.
15 less tabulators plugged in.
So I'd like to point that out. I know that is of interest to a number of my colleagues on this body as well. I think with anything, we've talked about the parties, you've talked about it here, the community members, ensuring that we have a really solid communication plan. I know that my intention is to support this item. So, is what does that communication look like should this pass? So I know there's some cost savings as it relates to, reduction, but what could we do additional outside of, those traditional methods to say, hey, your polling place has worked out. Can we do some connection or communication or contracting with our neighborhood associations? Can we do, the mayor's done a couple of mayor's minutes. Maybe he does one of these items as well. I think to colleague Commissioner Perdue sent a message earlier today. And I think that anytime there is change, like what are we going to do outside of our traditional communication methods to ensure people have that? I drove people a number of times to early voting. I would say thank you to those community partners who made early voting fun, who made it possible for people to, kind of come in and feel like it was an experience versus like something you have to do. I always had that. Let me sign. But I also wonder how we can utilize if there are cost savings to continue to evaluate, not only for the operations, but those continued outreach to encourage people to come out and vote. And then just recognizing, I don't know what that might look like. These partners that we've had on the ground have had, I think, good funding to do this work previously. I am concerned about what their funding might look like right now in a current reality of our federal administration. So I would also say, if we could connect with them I know this May election is a little bit different, but if we could connect with them in this year to talk about what does that funding look like. And I think it is a responsibility for us to hopefully, we can't fill all the federal holes, but where we can certainly with voter turnout, I'd like to have that discussion with this body.
Sure.
So a
couple things on communications. I do have a article drafted to the We Are GR that talks about that this is a possibility, just so that there, and then there's a link to our website that shows what the proposed maps look like, what proposed precinct changes look like. So that's out there. Also, every voter that's affected will get a new voter info card, and so. Two things that happen with that voter info card. First of all, people get information about their new precinct and a new location. And second of all, for those that the mail's not delivered, so we get all those cards back with the yellow stickers on them. We then go through all those yellow stickers that come back on return mail, and we mail out a postcard that says if they're moved outside the city, they get a postcard. If they moved within the city, they get a different color postcard, and we get that information back to update their voter records. So this is a very good voter record update process. It's not. Sometimes we like to do that, but this gives us that process to fix this. And I'm looking at this. I think this is our precinct map for the next couple decades, unless we have a lot of things with the census coming up. But I think this would be a plan that's going to sustain us for quite a while. And then also on another communication piece, I still have a contract with Well Design that we had through the 2024 election, and so we can probably do some social media stuff with them as well, and do some vlog and some video type stuff as well, what this all means.
Thank you.
Commissioner Perdue.
Thank you. Thank you, City Clerk. I appreciate your presentation. I appreciate all the work that went into this, and really appreciate and excited about the changes that stem from just the really thoughtful and intentional work that you and your team have led, the considerations of accessibility, proximity, the record update process that you talked about, and even the consideration of those county and state lines. I have no doubt in the excellence of your team and the thoughtfulness of your work. And so my following comments have nothing to do with that. So I want you to know that I do have full confidence in you and your team. But I appreciate the work behind this proposal. I know it was thoughtful, as said, and there will be a lot of benefits, as I just acknowledged. And I understand the administrative intent behind it. But that being said, I do have, and everyone knows on this body, and I want to share with the public, that I have real concerns about voter access with these proposed changes, especially in the 1st and the 3rd Ward. This change would eliminate 7 polling places in the 3rd Ward and alter 13 of our precincts, and citywide it will eliminate 15 locations and impact 30 precincts. Proximity to polling places really matters. It increases turnout, especially for first-time voters. And when we're considering making a change, that will be our map and our guiding and our ability for voters to access polling locations on Election Day for the next few decades. That brings up real concerns for me. Even though we've had major increases in early voting and absentee voting, which we should all celebrate, the majority of Grand Rapids voters still voted in person on Election Day this last November. So we have to protect, not reduce, precinct access, in my view. Even more, you just kind of noticed some numbers related to voter turnout. We're still less than 65% for the entire city. In some precincts, we're still less than 40% in the city. So we still have a long way to go in terms of voter access. Voting is foundational. We should be working to increase access, not make it more difficult to vote. And so I think that a lot of these changes around administrative efficiency is important, but access to the ballot really weighs more heavily. So, you know, I intend to vote no on this proposal when it comes before us. I will support moving this to public comment to get formal public input. And I do have a few follow-up questions for you, just for clarity's sake, and I ask for you as we prepare for that public hearing, because I do think that there are some administrative efficiencies here that don't necessarily threaten voter access, particularly the elimination of multiple precincts polling locations. I think that is a good change, administrative efficiency, cost saving, and does not threaten voter access. So those are the sort of changes that I can support as a full package. I won't be able to support it at this point. So my ask to you is, before the public hearing, would you be able to publish something with a little bit more details on each of those proposed changes to precincts, particularly those eliminations, which ones exactly are the elimination of same-site, multi-site polling locations, and how many precincts and how many people will have changes in their actual polling location? Yep. So I can say that again. Before the public hearing.
We're not having a public hearing on it.
Sorry.
Well, but it'll come up for a second reading, which will have public comment.
Sorry, yeah,
Yes.
thank you.
Yep.
Public comment.
Okay.
Thank you for that. So ahead of coming back up to us for a vote, hoping to see some of those more details around some of these changes for us, for our sake, for my sake, and certainly for the public's sakes. So 2 things that I can think of specifically are more details on each of those changes, particularly which of those precincts are an elimination of multi-site voting locations. That is a measure that I certainly support. It does not seem clear that that is the majority of the proposed eliminations or all of them. So I think that could be made clearer. And then am also interested and would like to see the number of precincts, or really the number of people that would have changes in their voting locations if this package as is went forward.
Sure.
Any questions on that ask? Is that
No,
reasonable?
that's fine, but just really quickly, so out of the 15 total being reduced, 9 of them are multi-site. multi-precinct polling locations. So a majority of them are. And so, and then the other ones are with that are dealt with schools. So a good.
Okay, thank you so I will be interested in hearing more about the numbers of people who will have, the exact number of people or registered voters that will experience a change in their voting locations. And I hear 6 sites, 6 precincts will be eliminated. So I still think that's a cause for concern in terms of voting access, especially if this is our map and our guide for the next several decades. We should be adding precincts. We should be making it more easy and more convenient for folks to vote, not reduce those sites because it's more convenient for us. The other aspect, or really a point of curiosity, based on feedback that I've received, and I'll wait for you to finish writing. So.
Okay, go ahead.
So if you go to the 3rd Ward map, you're doing 5 jobs over there. So between 55 and 57, is that Eastern Avenue?
Between 55 and 57. I think that might be Giddings. Because it does that, or Fuller. It's
Coming down, Fuller, okay.
Fuller, because it does that jog there in Boston Square.
Okay.
By the gas station there.
Okay. So last election cycle, I was at my voting location on Eastern and Baxter area.
Okay.
And there were 2 polling locations really close to one another. And as I went to go vote, 5 minutes to 8, it was like the closing mark. Someone in front of me had come to that location because the sign said, "Vote here today." He lives in the neighborhood. And they said, "This isn't your polling location. It's the one across the street. You live on the other side of Eastern in this case. It's the one across the street." So that was really confusing to him, and especially given it was, right up to 8 o'clock. I was worried that his vote, he didn't make it in time and his vote didn't count, which was really sad and frustrating to see. So it doesn't look like that's the case with this proposal along Eastern, but I am wondering if the proximity of those 2 sites on Fuller being so close and essentially kitty corner to each other will cause some confusion.
Well, it was closer at one point when it was Adams Park. It was Adams Park and Living Word. They were literally across Fuller from each other by Adams. So this will spread it out a little bit, because the other one was Adams Park and Seymour Square Christian Reformed Church, which were also very close together as well. And so this is the fine tuning of finding locations that are accessible too. And so when you think in your mind like, oh, there's all these spots. I really struggled in the 1st Ward finding locations when Stocking closed. It was really tough in that area because we have a lot of halls, but a lot of them, they all have steps. So a lot of the Polish halls and various other ethnic halls are great for having a party or whatever. They're not very accessible. And so trying to find, 1st Ward was the hardest for me to find locations. 3rd Ward, we're fortunate we are a city of churches for voting reasons, is because most of their buildings generally are accessible. There's a lot of churches that are not accessible either. And so I have a very fine tune, and I know there's some voters that don't want to go to churches either, but if that was the case, then we have, it's a balancing act.
Yeah, I don't doubt that it's a challenge, and you did due diligence. Were you seeing the same challenge in precinct 55 and 57 around sites? Is that a reason why those
there is?
so close
That's why
together?
we're going to Hub 07 is in that new facility, which is going to be I think a great new facility as far as just for the whole neighborhood there. It's exciting what's happening in Boston Square. So, yeah, I mean, looking at other places, like, that's why we were in Boston Square CRC, because there really wasn't any other options, but it wasn't the most accessible. We had to put in a special, we bring in a portable doorbell to let election workers know if someone doesn't have accessibility.
Yeah.
So it's not ideal. They have a lot of churches have lots of parking. Well, we have that discussion during housing, I know, but.
Okay. Curious too, speaking of locations, Calvin College, there's parts of Calvin that are in the 3rd Ward, but mostly residential, am I right? Okay. I think that access to.
That's why I think that most of their voters, if they're on campus, are going across the street to Woodlawn on Burton.
Good. Okay, so again, I have full faith in your due diligence and your commitment to election integrity and the best operations. And I have real concerns around voter access and truly believe that we have taken a lot of really great steps around voter access in Michigan over the last many years. But I do think that this will be a step backwards for Grand Rapidians if even just a few election sites are eliminated. And so I look forward to hearing from folks in the public and others, and ask that you consider these perspectives as you prepare to vote on this soon. City Clerk, one final ask of you as you look to release some of that public information before we vote is, I'm also curious to see the average number of registered voters that exist in the current format, and then the average number of registered voters that would exist by precinct in this proposed format. So kind of
I got the ask on that. That one's a little more difficult. It's one of those things where I can tell you what we have now.
Sure.
But what we have coming up is, till we get the street index, it's one of those things where we have to do it and see.
Sure.
So we can get an idea.
Get an estimate.
We can get close.
Yes.
Especially if we're combining just two together.
Yeah, I mean, so thinking about the law that allowed us to make these changes and think differently about how we organize our precinct map, it allows for 2,000 more voters in a precinct, and so I'm curious of what that average jump is, or that jump by jump around the city of how big are we making those precincts? So
to answer one of your questions, in the 3rd Ward, the 3 that we're suggesting being closed, with opening a new one and combination is Adams Park Apartments, Boston Square CRC, and Sigsbee School. 3.
So it would be great to see that captured and easy to cross-check for folks in the community.
Yep, easy to be done.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So a lot of good sentiment around the table here. And I understand you were working with, this is like a 7-dimensional problem. This is not a 2-axis problem. So you've got a lot of things to consider. I appreciate your engagement and all the subtlety on it. And I appreciate some of the sentiments. A couple things to piggyback off what Commissioner Perdue said. I think that, axiomatically, you reduce any precincts, you're going to making it there's going to be some harder for some people some of the time. I think that's clear. So let me. I've got about 6 things I want to ask you, and I want to ask you quick. So let's do rapid fire here. First of all, did you? And I have maybe longer history up here of being involved in city elections than anyone else. I was up here in 2009, 2010, and pretty scarred by some of the, frankly, appalling wait times long before your time at Alexander School, where they were literally 4 to 6 hour waits. And at that point, you're then, you're removing people's right to vote by means of exhaustion. I assume that you are tracking maximum wait times at the last election cycle for precincts. Do you know what our heaviest wait time precinct was and what the average wait time was at the heaviest used precincts?
I don't know exact wait times. I don't think people waited much more than a half hour in any of our precincts. In early voting, there was a couple times over the weekends where it got up to about an hour. But early voting is a little different because you can choose your adventure.
Right.
So day of, I don't think anybody was over a half hour from what I could hear from proactive volunteers, our staffing.
Okay, let's stop. I've got a lot to ask. So second of all then, could we articulate a standard where we said, well, let me ask the very first question. The plan you're proposing now, we're planning on setting a public hearing for this.
No public hearing.
Pardon me, no vote for this on the
29th, yep.
If we vote to forward this to the vote at the next step, can we modify between now and then? Or if we wanted to modify this, would we have to delay now? Are there any state law reasons? Because
no.
Okay, so we can modify between now and then, even if we vote to move this forward.
Correct, because
The reason I ask is I want every commissioner up here to have full opportunity to say, I do not want precinct X closed. That one's problematic. I get that we're talking about 6 precincts and closing. That's really what we're talking about, because I don't think anybody is really going to get too bothered about the fact, like when I vote at Westminster Pres, there's 2 different precincts there's 2 different lines. Frankly, it probably improves voter access if you just go in and there's one line, because you don't get in the wrong line and have the problem Commissioner Perdue referenced, even inside of a building, right? You might be patiently waiting in that line until 8:06 because if you're in line, you can still vote and find out, you were supposed to be the other line. I don't even legally know what happens to you at that point, whether you do lose your right to vote.
We give them a fast, you get a golden ticket. You get to fast pass the other line.
Okay, but there'd be.
We won't have to do that. It's moot.
Right, but there'd be an interesting, I don't know what the state law question is, and we'll talk about that offline. There's a legal question there. But, so we can modify this if we vote to advance right now?
Yep.
Okay, that was my first question. Second of all, have you thought, you talked about this being the map for the next couple decades. We can come back and modify this next year, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's great to have a roadmap for the next couple decades, but the reason I ask is because I think there are some things that I would like you to consider, and I'd like you to consider them on an iterative basis, and I hope that my colleagues would agree. First of all, max voters per precinct now is 5,000, give or take. That's under the new state law. Right. I would like to know if any of these precincts are above 4,500.
No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay, what's the max number? Do you know offhand? Give me rough guess.
Maybe 4,000 max.
Okay, the reason I ask is because you said for the next couple decades, if we need 15,000 housing units in Grand Rapids, if that data is true, if we're a growing city, if we manage to pull off producing the housing that's needed, we're talking about having a whole lot more residents in the city. So when we do street planning, traditionally, people look at what happens to market if there's 5% extra traffic. So modeling out what precincts are likely to grow, because some of our precincts are more likely to grow than others. All the ones that are platted, all single-family houses, like the Calvin College neighborhood that Commissioner Perdue talked about. Not likely we're going to get an explosion of high-density building on Woodcliff in the next 15 years. It's way more likely we're going to get high-density housing on State Street. So that precinct is potentially going to pop in population. Have you modeled out potential where you suspect we'll see growth in the city when you've made these maps or not?
No, because basically I was looking at where we had multiple locations for efficiencies there. And if we have to, yes, then we'll have to look at it. When you look at maybe Northern Second Ward, where there are some large tracts of land, or where school buildings are closed, what are those going to future look like? And there's ways to mitigate also higher turnout in a precinct as well that didn't have. Back in 08, 09, didn't have that ability. So, for example, looking at some of the Second Ward ones, like where we're combining at Faith Lutheran Church, which are 2 high turnout precincts that are going to be combined together, we can do piggybacked e-poll books. So instead of just one laptop computer, you can have 2 check-in stations. Okay. So we're looking at that kind of, so for those that we know that we can foresee may have longer lines because it was 2 precincts before, we can do multiple e-poll books.
Right. When you talked about the cost savings and you talked about the $20,000,
yep.
Is that for the 6 that you're proposing to eliminate, or is that
for the 15?
Oh, so that's a $300,000 per election?
No. So sorry, so it was $20,000 for all 15 precincts.
Oh, okay. So the money is not a huge consideration here then. Okay. The next thing is. I didn't hear you talk about this, and I understand you're already looking at 7 different variables. Mm-hmm. But in terms of our concern about access to voting, not all populations are equal. Some of these populations are very car-oriented. Some of them are not. And so I would like to see at least some thought put into the precincts where people are more likely to not be 2-car families and drive everywhere, like Precinct 57, for example. Those folks are likely to need to vote to walk, relatively more likely to be walking to a polling place.
Yeah, that's why they're at Boston Square.
Right. I'm sensitive to that, and particularly since that's also an environmental question. I mean, if you have a precinct in a very walkable neighborhood and you turn on the lights, but that means a whole bunch of people aren't driving, you probably win environmentally by having more rather than fewer polling locations in circumstances like that. The last thing I'm concerned about here, and this is a flag, and I'd like you to address this a little more specifically. I was not all that happy, and maybe I misunderstood it, but to analyze precincts by voter turnout. It seems to me that we should be screening polling locations based on population size, because the fact that you don't want that to become a self-fulfilling prophecy ever, and also the fact that someone doesn't vote in an election shouldn't disenfranchise them. They should always have an equal opportunity to vote. So we should be mapping this out essentially as though all populations were voting at 100% and looking at our precincts that way, it seems to me. And if that's a cost we have to incur, I do not want to be disadvantaging people who live in a low turnout neighborhood based on their prior behavior. That does not sound to me like a modeling that makes a democratic sense at all to me.
Correct.
Now, I get that may make traditional clerk thinking sense, but it does not make democratic sense
Well,
to me.
those two lowest precincts were not changing.
Okay, but again, right, so I don't want, so you're telling me that low turnout does not influence your modeling. You're modeling based on population, not on turnout?
We're looking at facilities is one option. Yeah, you said this is seven different levels. We're looking at splits. We're looking at percentages too. I mean, if we have an 80% turnout, so like precinct 18, if you look at the western half of up the hill in the first ward, none of those are being changed. They're 80% turnout, and there's potential for growth up there too yet. You got some large tracts there that could change, but also in those smaller turnout ones, we haven't done much changes either. And if we did do changes, it was like by a few blocks. It wasn't like a wholesale change.
Okay.
If you look at the history of Grand Rapids precincts, I think at its high it was 125 precincts when it was very neighborhood. You were voting lever machines. Then it went down to 100. Then down to 77, 76, 74, and now this proposal.
Yep, and I get all the sentiments, but I want to point out is the last, and I don't think this is fully baked into our thinking at this point, and it may be too late for it to be true for this plan, but it should be true going forward, is, all right, let's imagine everyone around this table is a U.S. citizen over the age of 18. So we all have the ability to vote, but only 2 of us are registered to vote. Well, I wouldn't want a map that was based on how many registered voters there were ultimately, because then the people around the table here who haven't registered yet are still citizens. They're still voting eligible, and so I want our accessibility to be for eligible voters, not for registered voters. It seems to me fundamentally that's more democratic. Otherwise, you're disenfranchising people based on whether they, at the point you make your modeling, have gone to the Secretary of State and registered. That's problematic because of resident distrust. I mean, we've had a lot of conversation and listened to a lot of people.
If you will share that database with me, I would be happy to take a look at it.
Well, and I guess the point is, going forward, that should be our standard. I mean, we've had a lot of conversations about fear in the community, and there's a lot of people in the community who have distrust of government, and it is a long-term challenge that we're going to have to deal with. But if we believe that every eligible registered voter should have equal access to the ability to vote, that should be based on their eligibility to vote, not their registering to vote. So I get that you may not have that data now. I'm just saying our gold star for the future, and maybe AI will help us get there, maybe better data will help us get there. I don't know, but it seems to me that the democratic ideal should be basing precincts on eligible voters, not registered voters. So I'll leave it at that. And if that's not something you can attain right now, I think I hear you saying that. But anytime we start modeling things based on voter turnout, we're 2 bounces away from where I want to be, because I don't want to.
Sure, and our registered voters have increased too. Obviously, in 2016, I think we had 136,000 voters. We're up to 152,000 now.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Well, that was a lot of ground I covered at the end there, but thank you for the presentation. And looks like we lost a commissioner, so. Let's wait. I don't want to make him miss a vote.
Can I just ask a clarifying point? Yeah. So this is slated to be on the agenda as is now. I just want to be clear. So is there a propose revision that's preferable to the majority of the commission, so we're not taking this amount of time at the next city commission meeting.
Great point, City Manager. So you put up the precincts that you're going to consolidate. You didn't put up the ones you're going to flat out eliminate in your slide. Do you have that list? Do you know?
I do have that list.
Okay, and have we got that? Have you provided that to us?
No, only by probably just because you have the directory of what I'm proposing. So I guess you have it by omission.
Right. So could you perhaps, I think that would help Commissioner Perdue and myself, I think, and probably everyone else, have a little more comfort if we knew which ones were being eliminated, because that would give us a red flag. I think I'm prepared to proceed right now unless Commissioner Perdue, you had a specific one you wanted to keep on the list, but I know I'm putting you on the spot because we've got 7 and we don't exactly know which 7 we're talking about.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have an exact proposed amendment at the moment. It's all kind of packaged together. I think there's a little bit more information that will help make that clear related to how many people will be impacted, the average estimated number of, whether it's registered vote. I think you bring up a great point. Thank you, of eligible voters. That data is available most likely at the census tract level, so I can see how there will be some difficulty overlaying that with precinct level. And then I think a before and after map. So, in the package, there's this proposal, there's the red line version of what will be eliminated and what will be merged. But I think it will be.
Use the word highlighted instead of redlined.
I'm talking about the one that has the.
I'm sorry, I was being flippant.
Red line version. So I think I need, and I think our community would need a little bit more detail of the nuances of the proposed changes in order to have a more exact minute change.
Can I tell you?
And if nothing else, my amendment is not to eliminate any. How about that? My amendment is not to eliminate any precincts unless it's the elimination of the multi-site precincts. So those 6 that will be altogether eliminated, that's what I will want removed from this package. I think the other things that you talked about, the other considerations around accessibility, about making it easier and more efficient by not having 2 polling locations at the same location, those are all I support, but I do not support the elimination outright of precincts. And so that will be my proposed amendment that I ask others to support.
Okay. So I want to be clear. So East Leonard Elementary is no longer available. And so I'm changing lines in order to add a new location. You're okay with that?
You're saying, am I okay with changing the exact polling location within the precinct?
Yeah, because the 6, it's not just 6 gone. There's some changes. There's changes too.
You said Aquinas doesn't want to be a polling location.
Right.
Sure.
Or I should say at our rate.
Right. So let me suggest.
Can we put
City
the
Clerk,
3rd ward map back up, please?
And City Clerk, you'll make yourself available to talk with Commissioner
let
Perdue.
me tell you exactly what the ask here is. So the ordinance, the city ordinance says, so that this is the gray area here. So the city of Lansing, this did not go to their city commission. Their election commission did the whole work. Okay. State law says that the election commission can change boundaries. We have that full authority to do anything we want to do on that, as long as we have a majority of the election commission. Our city ordinances say how many precincts there are. So basically the resolution adopting the ordinance changes one word or one number from 74 to 59. So whatever this commission says for the ordinance, I'm making a recommendation as staff via as a liaison from the elections commission to say, this is our request. If it came to the point of we have to rescind this to do, I'm trying to come up with a way. So I'm not saying, so there's different ways to approach this process. So I'm trying to open it up and having commission buy-in.
Right.
So the question is, so if you want to make it 60, 61, then the election commission can go back and change boundaries to match that. The city commission does not have the authority to do boundaries, or what you have authority in state law to do is set polling locations. So what buildings we use.
And just to be clear then, if Commissioner Perdue, you're saying my amendment would be to not eliminate any, essentially, we'd be just saying is you want to vote against the proposed ordinance change. So I don't think there is an amendment. You're just saying at this point you'd be a no vote. Because the amendment is to change to do exactly what you're saying your amendment would not do. So your amendment would be to undo the resolution in its entirety, as I understand it.
Well, I think today's presentation was really helpful to hear the justification behind a number of the proposed elimination, particularly that, to clarify, 9 of the 15 proposed eliminations are to eliminate multi-site.
That is correct.
So 18 precincts going down to 9, merging to 9, because they were in the same location, they're voting at the same church.
Correct.
Do we need to double check that?
So, yeah, go.
I would like to finish.
Okay.
I just wanted to offer a comment to that, Commissioner, just in terms of the numbers. So because I think I think I'm hearing your question. So in the first ward, there were 23 precincts. You're proposing 20.
Correct.
In the second ward, there were 25 precincts. You're proposing 19.
20.
20, I'm sorry. And then in the third ward, 26 to 18.
To 19.
I'm sorry, to 19. I keep having the number off. So I just wanted to add that in there because I think that was helpful when I looked at the memo and I looked at the precinct directory to kind of say, okay, I was trying to count the double, if you will, precincts at the location. So I just wanted to offer that for the conversation.
Yeah, I reviewed that, and I'm familiar with the proposed new locations and the changes in the numbers by ward based on what was in the package. So my question was really just to confirm of the 9. So 9 of the 15 eliminated sites.
Yes.
You're saying the justification is solely because they're
in the same
two
building.
precincts in the same building.
Yes.
Okay. So there were 18 precincts voting at 9 locations. So we're saying
yes.
Keep them 9. Yep. Okay. And then there's 6 locations, 6 sites that are pure elimination. So my amendment to consider would be, instead of going down from, you said 59 would be the proposal now, right? If we keep the 6 that are proposed to be outright eliminated, then the proposal or the proposed amendment is to keep our polling locations to 65. You follow?
Yeah, I'm following you. So what that, okay.
Colleagues, did you follow that?
I just wanted to ask for a quick
napkin, Matt.
point of order, because we have a motion on the table, right, to support this item as is. So I'm just trying to understand and clarify procedurally what's being proposed,
We're
amended.
discussing a potential amendment
Sure. So is
to
that,
the item on the table.
okay, so is that a motion for an amendment that we need to have a second and then a vote on the amendment?
That's going to be the question. Are you proposing?
Yes, that is our motion to, let me bring up the exact language.
Is there support for that motion? Did you make it?
It's not, I'm looking for the exact language, but I think we are, so yeah.
Commissioner, I think in the resolution, in the be it resolved section, it provides language that changes the polling locations to 59.
Yep, thank you.
So it's section 1.41.
1.41, thank you. So I propose to amend the motion to establish 65 election precincts instead of the proposed 59.
Support? Not seeing support. Motion does not proceed. Motion for amendment. So I think at this point, I'm prepared to vote on the resolution. Any discussion? Further discussion? Commissioner Yancey.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate this conversation. This was probably longer than most resolutions, and I think that's fine. Thank you, Mr. President of the Commission, for bringing us back to kind of what was in front of us. I think that while I didn't support the amendment, I think that discussion about, I would like to bring back the discussion about those outside parties, which it's the, you know, the city is, our job is to run the election safely, clearly, fairly. And then there's a lot of outside organizations that have received funding to hopefully to promote that. I do want to continue to recognize, if we can go back, again, just knowing kind of what's happening at the federal level, to be able to go back to those organizations, just understand how they're being impacted, so then we can, to the concerns that were brought up in this conversation, understand how we can lift them up and understand like how we potentially could support. So I think we can do both things. It might not always look the same, but I do, you know, you mentioned a couple of organizations that have certainly been coordinating and connecting with you, at least during the time that I know you've been clerk. And I want to make sure we're not, I don't think that you would lose it, but to raise up their voice even more during this time. So thank you.
Commissioner Perdue, final comment?
Final comment, you know, I think it is our duty to maintain voter access, and I'm obviously disappointed that there wasn't support for the amendment to ensure that we do not eliminate precinct sites altogether in our city. I will support bringing this to vote. Actually, no, I was thinking public hearing. I don't plan to support this. Thank you.
And I want to point out, just to remind everyone, that obviously this proposal can be modified before we come up for the next vote, and that was the clerk's point. And I certainly hope we can continue to have discussion, and I will say that I'm open to modifications of this. I didn't support the motion because I don't support wholesale rejection of eliminating any sites, but I certainly do want to keep the conversation proceeding. Yes, Commissioner Perdue.
I think, you know, we hear often from city manager that he and his staff need direction from this body in order to come back with any amendment. So I think a blanket modification is not enough information for him and his team to take back to bring something different. So I think if you or others do want to see some changes, you all need to make that clearer.
Sure. But what I will do, Commissioner, is provide the information to the best of my ability that I can. As far as those numbers, I don't know if I can get down into the census blocks for persons potential resident or potential voters. I don't know if we can get down into that level. But what I can do is provide a clear breakdown of what each precinct looks like and what the changes are. And I thought I kind of did that, but it's in numbers, not like locations. So some people think numbers, some people think locations and pictures. So I'll come up with something that lays it out.
Yeah, I think we need to provide as much information to possible to folks in the community.
Yep.
So thank you, and thank you, Mayor.
May I just add a comment? No?
Go ahead.
I just want to remind folks that we will have a public comment period on this before we vote. So I would like to see more community input if they care on this particular issue.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Well,
City
I
Manager.
do agree that we need to continue this discussion, so I just want to point that out.
You only care if you show up for public comment is not fair.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to help my colleague out, so he's heard a lot of feedback around the dais today. So the proposal before us is what was put forth. Do you have enough feedback now to put together an alternative or two in the event the city commission wants to deviate from what's presented today? You feel comfortable, you can come back, give them the robust feedback to have a couple other alternatives to pick from?
Potentially, yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, I will ask for a vote on the motion then. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed?
No.
Thank you. Motion carries. Thank you, City Clerk, and thanks everyone for the great discussion. This brings us to resolution setting April 29 as a date to hold public hearing on the Grand Rapids Climate Action and Adaptation Plan. Ms. Wilkinson's coming up, I assume, and I'd like to see a motion.
So moved.
Support?
Support.
Thank you. Assistant City Manager.
Mayor, Commissioners, I am not Miss Annabelle Wilkinson. I just wanted to give a little preface before we give the presentation because there's, I'm sorry, Doug Matthews, Assistant City Manager. A little preface to this because the CAP at this point has spanned 3 different city commissions. and 2 sustainability officers over the course of the time, from the time that we made the move to develop this to today. And I wanted to put that into context. There's been a lot of community work. I know that there's a lot of community conversation about this. I'm hopeful that we'll still have some time to be able to address some of that today, but I did want to give you that little bit of a preface before Ms. Annabelle Wilkinson comes up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant City Manager Matthews. Good morning, Commissioners. Annabelle Wilkinson, Chief Sustainability Officer, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our Climate Action Adaptation Plan today. Specifically, an overview of the plan, a look at its process, the plan organization, the goals and strategies that are outlined within this plan, and a request to set a public hearing, and a look at the next steps. So why we are pursuing a climate action adaptation plan is because it is set in our city's strategic plan to reduce carbon emissions, support climate adaptation, and increase climate resilience. It specifically calls out creating and beginning to implement a climate action adaptation plan that's in partnership with community, but also that parallels and complements our community master plan. And as a refresher, our Climate Action Adaptation Plan is a roadmap for how the community of Grand Rapids will both reduce greenhouse gas emissions and prepare for the impacts of climate change. This climate plan was co-created in partnership with community stakeholders and is based on resident feedback. And we're working to meet our community-wide science-based targets that are 62.8% greenhouse gas reduction per capita community-wide by 2030 from our 2019 emissions and 100% by 2050. We want to keep in mind that this is a community-wide plan. While the City of Grand Rapids is absolutely committed to addressing the climate crisis by working towards the goals, strategies, and actions that are outlined in this plan to achieve our adopted community-wide science-based targets, achieving these targets will need community buy-in preceding action in order to make a difference. As you can tell from this image, our government municipal operations are only 2.21% of our total community-wide emissions. That being said, the city will act as a leader in this work, modeling emissions reductions in our municipal facilities and fleet, implementing actions that are under local control like land use, advocating for the legislative and regulatory changes needed to move our goals forward. But also, we need to bring community stakeholders to the table to really focus on who can join us in this work, bringing more innovative solutions and making community progress together. As we mentioned previously, we focused a lot on the intersection with our community master planning process. We worked in collaboration with the Community Master Plan on its bold vision for the next 20 years of land use development. And the climate plan includes 54 strategies and actions that correspond directly with the Community Master Plan across 4 of its chapters. The climate plan also incorporates engagement data from the Community Master Plan feedback into the plan. Here's a brief overview of the climate plan process and timeline that was established, focusing on moving from pre-planning in 2022 through our rounds of engagement, and then we're currently in a current plan adoption consideration stage before moving into implementation. And I'll provide a little bit more information on each of these areas in the coming slides. So with pre-planning, again, we coordinated with the Community Master Planning timeline and engagement process, but also we understood that the Community Master Plan was a bold 20-year vision for the city as a whole. And for our Climate Action Adaptation Plan, we focused more on a targeted universalism approach to community engagement. So that was a process of setting universal goals, but addressing the barriers and resource deficiencies to ensure that all groups achieve those goals. And that was because of an EPA report that found that socially vulnerable populations like low-income communities, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and low educational attainment and individuals who are older may be more exposed to the highest impacts of climate change. So we worked with a local organization called the Community Collaboration on Climate Change, a climate justice community-based organization, to really center our community engagement on those most likely to face barriers to participation, including residents who are unhoused, identify as BIPOC, youth and seniors, as well as Spanish-speaking communities. So working with the C4, we created a climate plan committee to plan those engagement events, provide feedback on the climate plan process, collaborate on a racial equity framework, and reviewing drafted recommendations throughout the process. We also worked with their C4 community ambassadors, who are local climate justice advocates who work to engage local residents in their neighborhoods of focus. And then for each round, we focused on in-person events that were located in our neighborhoods of focus that focused on removing barriers to participation by providing dinner, childcare, translation services, and compensation for participation. During this pre-planning phase, we also worked on a greenhouse gas emissions inventory. to identify what greenhouse gases are the primary drivers in Grand Rapids. And what we found were residential and commercial buildings, transportation, and industrial energy uses. And those emissions are predominantly generated from fossil fuel consumption like natural gas, electricity, and transportation. We also conducted a climate risk and vulnerability assessment, which is essentially a local study that helps identify current and future risks associated with climate change and helps inform climate adaptation actions in this plan. So we reviewed climate science, both current impacts as well as projections, and then we also worked with key stakeholders around infrastructure and community, city staff, and other local experts to inform the climate risk and vulnerability assessment process. Working with the C4, we also worked to engage with the most vulnerable communities that may be most prone to the hazards of climate change that we will experience in Grand Rapids. So that focused on 6 in-person focus groups with populations such as Spanish speakers, the unhoused, youth, and seniors to discuss the impacts of heat and flooding. So for our engagement process, again, collaborating with the Community Collaboration on Climate Change as well as other local community-based organizations, we focused on 3 rounds, moving from visioning, which was introducing the climate plan to the public, gaining an understanding of communities' current climate impacts that they're feeling, what were their priorities for the plan, as well as brainstorming a vision for future climate work in Grand Rapids. For round 2, we went into what were the key draft strategies and actions that were decided upon by the round 1 visioning information, the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, the input from our climate advisory teams that we collaborated with to help draft those chapters, and key subject matter experts in the areas. And then community provided responsive feedback and direction on each chapter. And then for round 3, we compiled all that information that we received from those series of events and surveys and presented the final draft of the climate plan and utilized that same chapter structure to process feedback from community, to understand if we heard them right, were they satisfied with the plan, and if not, what changes needed to be made. So a large variety of engagement techniques were used: in-person workshops, virtual meetings, tabling and engaging at community events, one-on-one interviews, focus group feedback, online surveys, as well as climate advisory teams. In total, the climate process engaged over 1,600 people in a variety of formats across 2 years. Bless you. And the community master planning data was sourced specifically from the community master plan's 2nd round of engagement, and we included the feedback of over 1,800 participants that focused in that round, because workshops were held on the topics of climate mitigation, climate adaptation, and environmental justice. Now, our targeted universalism approach did increase community ownership, and we sought to remove those barriers to participation for in-person events, and we're intentionally locating and marketing to residents in our neighborhoods of focus. That being said, a majority of those engagements were in-person events, and demographic data, while requested at those events, was not always given. And so while we do have demographic data from our climate plan surveys, that alone doesn't really capture the authenticity of the planning process, as it includes only 41% of those engaged. However, we do have that data available in our community engagement report in Appendix B of the plan. So all of that engagement helped to create the framework that we have today. Our CAP vision is that Grand Rapids will be a resilient, low-carbon city that centers equity and climate solutions to ensure a safe and healthy community. And with that greenhouse gas emissions inventory, as well as communities' priorities that were identified in the 1st round of engagement, the CAP chapters break down to be energy systems, residential homes, buildings and industry, transportation, nature-based solutions, and food systems. And our structure for the plan flows from goals to strategies to 197 actions. So the goals that we've established are more specified to achieving their community-wide science-based targets and those desired outcomes, and to reduce the impacts of climate change. Our strategies are major initiatives or services that need to be completed in order to make progress towards those goals. And then actions are the programs, activities, and projects that'll push forward the strategies. And throughout the plan, you'll see the following themes next to each of the actions: health, resilience, equity, economic prosperity, and collaboration. So we're going to dive into a review of the goals and strategies for each of these 6 chapters. And so for energy systems, the goals are 80% electricity grid decarbonization by 2030 and an increase the reliability and resilience of energy systems. For the strategies, this includes increasing residents, businesses, and organizations' access to and understanding of energy systems, increasing access to and participation in decision-making for energy systems like the Michigan Public Service Commission, helping to decrease the cost of renewable energy or other innovative low to no emission technologies, supporting the installation of solar or low to no emission technologies, so reducing barriers and increasing access to resources, supporting the purchase of renewable and carbon-free energy, like renewable energy credits, nurturing a clean energy economy, career development, and improving the resilience of the energy system. For residential homes, the goals established are that 5% of all existing buildings reduce energy 20% by 2030. All new residential buildings and 1% of existing buildings will meet the International Energy Conservation Code of the 2018 code. That all new residential buildings and 11% of existing buildings are electrified per year until 2030, and to improve the health and resilience of housing to the impacts of climate change. So the strategies we've identified to move towards those goals are to increase energy efficiency of housing, supporting the transition to clean energy use in housing, increasing community capacity, awareness of, and access to home improvement resources, improving resident access to information resources on how to make their homes healthy and climate resilient, and calling specifically from the Community Master Plan, expanding the amount and variety of housing types across all price points to address the rental and for sale housing gaps in Grand Rapids, which could be exacerbated by potential climate migration. For buildings and industry, the goals established are that 10% of all existing commercial buildings reduce energy 20% per year until 2030, that 5% of existing commercial buildings are electrified per year until 2030, and to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from industrial processes. And then further technical analysis is required to establish this target, which we'll be working on in our next greenhouse gas emissions inventory. For the 4 strategies that work towards those goals are to increase community awareness, understanding, and capacity to address how much energy buildings use and the emissions they generate, reduce the amount of energy used and the emissions generated by existing buildings, ensuring that new construction buildings are high-performing and low to zero emissions and climate resilient, and strategy 4, to reduce the amount of energy used and emissions created in industrial processes. For transportation, our goals are that 10% of vehicle miles traveled will be reduced per capita by 2030 through the promotion and expansion of active and shared modes of transportation, 20% increase in ridership for public, active, and shared modes of transportation by 2030, and 22.5% of vehicle miles traveled will be with electric vehicles by 2030. So the strategies that we've identified to move towards these goals are to educate residents for all transportation options and their environmental impacts, expand and protect pedestrian network and amenities, build out a safe bicycle network by expanding separated and protected bicycle lanes and increasing access to non-motorized transportation, supporting regional projects that promote transit, focus land use practices on more accessible, dense, and less car-centric neighborhoods, another direct tie to the Community Master Plan, promoting accessibility to electric and low to no emission vehicles, and electrifying our city fleet. For our nature-based solutions, goals and strategies, our goals are to achieve our 40% tree canopy goal to increase carbon sequestration and ensure that both people and the natural environment are healthy and resilient to the impacts of climate change. So the strategies that we're working towards include continuing and expanding tree planting, preservation, and maintenance programs, partnerships, and incentives, fostering positive health benefits by increasing equitable access to green space, and that is a strategy that's currently being worked on with our Parks and Recreation Department and is featured in their strategic master plan for Parks and Recreation. For strategy 3, continue to prioritize green infrastructure development, as well as encouraging sustainable regenerative land management practices like native plantings. And lastly, for food systems, our goals are to reduce waste-related emissions by reducing food scraps into landfills, reducing solid waste, and encouraging sustainable consumption, and improve the health and resilience of the food system to the impacts of climate change. And the strategies that we are focusing on to address those goals are to strengthen the local food economy, to address food access and supply chain issues, reducing the amount of food and solid waste generated, increasing access to composting services and provide resources for residential composting, create and promote opportunities for people to learn about, grow, prepare, and share their own food, And then lastly, to build and design our community to improve accessibility to healthy foods. And there was a lot of cohesion with this chapter with the Kent County Food Policy Council's food system plan as well that was presented. Now, as I mentioned, there are 197 actions within this plan, and I will not have time to go over them with you today. So we provided just a few examples to discuss for you to give an idea of kind of what's in the plan. So for energy systems, one example is that we continue to advocate for the state of Michigan legislation to keep us at the forefront of climate-focused energy systems. So that would be advocating for bills like community solar to allow individual and organizational ownership and wealth generating opportunities. For residential homes, one of our actions would be to create a wraparound whole homes approach to streamline housing services to residents. So creating a single point of contact that helps identify how to best stack and braid available resources. How can we create materials that are accessible in different languages and partner with multiple organizations to connect those working on separate but related issues. For buildings and industry, partnering with Vicinity Energy to continue to implement efficiency projects and pursue electrification of the STEAM district. For transportation, expanding and promoting the DART electric vehicle car share pilot program through our mobile GR department. For nature-based solutions, prioritizing neighborhoods with low tree equity scores, neighborhoods that have populations that have a higher risk for the urban heat island effect and outdoor air pollution, for tree plantings and habitat restoration. And lastly, for food systems, increasing public access to composting services through establishing neighborhood compost sites and drop-off locations through partnerships with local organizations, establishing an education campaign to teach how to compost and how to prevent contamination, and then exploring the practicality of a curbside composting program and incentives for composting. So with all of that in mind, with the process and the plan, our next step is to request to set a public hearing for April 29th at 7 p.m. or soon thereafter in the City Commission chambers. And the potential adoption consideration process timeline, it would be starting with today, setting a public hearing, potentially holding a public hearing on April 29th, as well as a potential adoption consideration on May 13th. So again, those next steps would be a potential adoption consideration, but moving forward past that would be focusing on implementation prioritization. Working on releasing a request for proposals that we're currently finishing up right now to assess greenhouse gas reduction potential for actions and assess funding costs for actions with a consultant. Taking that information and prioritizing what strategies and actions need to come first to make the most impact for short, medium, and long-term priority. Creating a timeline, creating an online accountability hub so that residents and stakeholders can understand the progress being made towards this plan. And then lastly, identifying responsible parties, having those conversations both internally with departments, but also with our community stakeholders to ensure that everyone's at the table to move this plan forward. And I would be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Before we do that, I don't know if we had a motion on this. Could I have a motion? Oh, we don't need, this is just a hearing. We do? Oh, I did. I'm sorry. Okay, questions, fellow commissioners? Commissioner Kelly.
Can we comment?
Of course.
Yeah, so first I just want to say, the department has done a very good job through different leadership of doing this work. I've been able to see this work, firsthand, and how the Office of Sustainability has done really good outreach and worked with our community on this plan. I'm hopeful. I think one of the first questions that I had to you when I was first coming on as a commissioner was, do you need more support? And then I think we met, that was the day, city manager, when we met with like every department. But I really asked that question, you sparked that question, because this is a lot of work. It's ambitious work, which is really good because climate change is real. These challenges truly are real. So I believe that the plan overall is ambitious, but for good reason, right? But I am hopeful that we can find some type of way. I'm just optimistic to find more support for this office. I just want that to be known as something that is a thought in the back of my mind. An overwhelming theme for me, and you've noted both of the themes that I'm thinking of in your next steps, which I'm really happy. And as I've said, my most recent role with working with WEMAC as the Director of Engagement, this was my work for the past 2 years, was really seeing what our community wants to see in terms of policy actions, in terms of community action. So my real theme here is the dashboard, right? And when you talked about that in next steps, like I really believe that that has been one of the number one pressing things that I've heard from folks all over is they want a central thing that folks can see. It's digestible, it's simple, and it shows both, it keeps us accountable as a city and shows what we're doing with that, for the carbon emissions, for example, what we're doing with that less than 3% of the responsibility that we have. So I'm happy that was addressed. And then also the flow of implementation of, once again, digestible, simple ways that folks can see where we are with these things. The CAP plan in itself is lengthy, it's long, and that's fine for people who have time. But frankly, I think how we get people a part of this whole environmental justice movement is having it be digestible, having it be easily relatable. And I think that is also my final, so those are themes that I see that you have in next steps. I'm very happy to see that. And then lastly, a theme that I really want us to continue thinking about is how do neighbors see themselves in this work? So we have these goals, we have these actions, but will we have someone from your office, from the city, that will be able to meet people where they are? For example, not sorry to mince words here, but, it says, okay, we're going to bring folks to the table. I think that needs to be reversed. I think we need to be scouting people out, meeting them where they are to talk about what you do to reduce your emissions for your home. Right? So I really want to see specifics on who's going to be doing that. What's the timeline on that, right? To once again translate and tell people about the dashboards that you say you're going to implement and the sequencing, the implementation, short-term, mid-term, long-term. That's great if we have that. I'm happy it's the next steps, but the outreach and education part is going to be a huge part of this because as you know, everyone doesn't have your background or the work that I've done or, maybe some fellow commissioners have done as well. So those are my themes. Very happy for this work. I am so excited to hear from community on this later on and will be very happy to support it.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Pugh.
Thank you so much for the presentation and the immense amount of work that went into this thus far. I've heard a ton of just positive excitement about this coming to us and finally getting across the finish line of our adoption very soon here. I, kind of in the same vein of transparency and actionable items, I know that one of the next steps is to prioritize strategies and actions for short, medium, long. But do you have a sense of right now what amount of these of the 197 actions are considered administrative or program changes? How much of them really require financial or other investments? How many of them are, what percentage or proportion is policy change? I'm curious how these actions really break down in kind of the pathways to get them done. I don't know if you have that answer off the top of your...
I was just going to say, that's not something that we have compiled yet, but I think that's something that we can compile to break down a little bit more on program policy.
Yes.
Yep,
I think that would be helpful for us, like where do we support, where are our considerations, as well as for that engagement and where other folks fit in, as you were speaking to Commissioner Kilgore. One of my other questions that I don't think you'll be able to answer today, because you said your next step is to prioritize, but I am really interested in what short, medium, long, particularly short, like what can we do over the next 5 years, and what's the dollar amount associated with those short-term actions, and are they administrative, programmatic, policy? So I think that will help us and folks in our community, everyone just really wrap their head around how do we activate this to make sure it's not just a plan that we're proud of and sits on the shelf, but we truly implement it. And implementation, there's some things that I'm sure we can do really quick, short-term, educational in nature, but there are going to be a number of items that will require significant investment and true strategy and collaboration to get done. So I think it'll be helpful to have a sense of what that shakes up to be. So.
Thank you, Commissioner. You're right. I don't have necessarily all of the answers because we still need to do that analysis. But there are a couple actions that were included because obviously this planning process took 2 years that we have started working on already. So, for example, our Solarize program, we recently launched that around a month ago. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think we just got the word back that 17 homeowners opted for solar for that first event, which is a great news. They were able to get a group buy discount for that. So that's very exciting, and we're looking forward to moving forward with that program now that we have that started. But also, our planning department also worked on reducing barriers to our zoning ordinance, which was passed just a couple weeks ago. So that was another thing that was included in the plan. So I feel like we're continually making those small steps that we can see to make immediate differences. But you're right. I look forward to kind of having that more tangible financial cost and prioritization available.
It's nice to know that you all have been simultaneously executing while planning. That's a really smart choice. And then did I hear you mention around the dashboard, will this dashboard be integrated with the community master plan dashboard? And what's the estimated time?
So our dashboard, I think it depends on which service we go through, because I know the community master plan has a specific service. So I think it just depends on what has the best user ability. But I think there is potential to have a similar dashboard to ease user friendliness.
Okay, so we're still exploring.
We have a couple options at the city. One is like an Envisio is an example that we use for the strategic plan internally that a couple other cities have used externally for their climate action adaptation plan. So we're just assessing which program we have access to that would work best.
Thanks.
Here. So that, just for the commission, to clarify more on a more macro level, after we get feedback on what the commission, hear from the public what the commission's willing to support in terms of implementation, the reason why that time frame goes from June to December, in addition to getting department and community feedback, I intend to bring all that to our city commission workshop retreat in the fall. And so then you'll have comprehensively feedback from stakeholders, from staff, and then we'll hear your priorities. And that will help me narrow down what we can focus on in the short term in upcoming budgets and what's more long term, particularly if they're capitalized items. And also we'll be able to segregate what will be policy and administrative decisions. So I don't want there to be any expectation that as soon as whatever's adopted, we're going to immediately have priorities for implementation without having that robust engagement, and then most importantly, without hearing from this body on what of the 197 priorities in the different sections of the plan seem to be most important and feasible in terms of implementing.
Thank you, City Manager. Frankly, I do not think that this plan is even approximately ready for adoption. I'm very concerned by it. To be perfectly clear, I've spent a lot of my life working on actual implementation of environmental issues and working on environmental policies a long time. I'm very conversant in the area. I talk with engineers all the time. I've done actual installations. While I applaud the community outreach involved here, I am not interested in publicly suggesting goals that I think that are not even approximately attainable. And so I think that, frankly, I think we've got an order of operations problem here. To say that we've got proposed actions, I looked at some of these actions. So, for example, provide support and guidance to other fleets on electrification. Well, what is that going to do? Everyone in this city by this point knows they can buy EVs. They see them all the time. I'm not sure that us giving more information is going to magically make people buy EVs. I think that there are lots of instantiated things we could work on in that space, and we've been talking about some of those. I think that if you want to instantiate some goals on EV, one of them would be we don't have a single direct charge station in the city of Grand Rapids, and there are viable places where we could have a pay-per-use DC charging station, which wouldn't cost the city anything. That would be a useful goal, saying let's go educate people or provide information on how to access information for first-time EV buyers. Like, what percentage of the city who's looking at cars doesn't understand that there are current incentives for buying EVs? I bet it's a pretty small percentage. Like, if you haven't figured out by now that there's a $7,500 tax break for sedans below $40,000 and for big trucks below $60,000, I don't know what world you've been living in. I don't think lack of information is the issue there. And frankly, I find some of these goals just unbelievable. The idea that we would actually propose that 11% of existing residential buildings become electrified per year for the next 5 years. So we actually think half of the people in this city are going to rip out their furnaces and install some kind of electric alternative in the next 5 years. My furnace costs $25,000. I really don't, I'm not interested in throwing away my $25,000 furnace. I just don't see any planet on which that's possible, especially since I have no idea. I mean, maybe there's some funding source, maybe there's magic federal money that I missed, but I do not see any throw away your furnace and replace it policy that exists right now. So, I mean, that's just doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, we could plan to like colonize the Marineris Trench in the next 5 years if we wanted, but I don't think we've got the technology, and I don't think it's feasible. The idea that we might actually get existing commercial buildings to reduce their energy use by 20% per year until 2030 per year. So over the next 5 years, we're going to ask these commercial buildings to do sequential energy reductions of 20%. In the energy space, there's no free lunch. This is basic physics. Matter can't be created or destroyed. There's laws of conservation of matter. If you can't, I can't imagine how in any of my commercial buildings I would magically reduce energy reduction 20%. If I could figure out how to do that, I would have done it already. The idea that I might then have to go around and do another 20% the next year, the fact of the matter is we live in a climate where sometimes you have to heat places and sometimes you have to cool them for them to be habitable, and that costs energy. I just don't see how any of this is possibly scalable out at those level of goals, in which case if we're adopting goals that maybe say that 50% of the population of Grand Rapids learns how to fly by 2030, we could pass that as a goal. But if there's no realistic possibility that that's going to happen, I just don't see that I possibly feel comfortable supporting a document that suggests things that I don't see how they're attainable. Now, if this was a document that instead of having 75 vague statements of community support had specific plans, like, for example, if one of the plans for this that was in here was let's make Butterworth landfill into a solar farm, but it's 180 acres. That's about 10% of the land we would need to actually get Grand Rapids residential energy use converted to solar. My back of the napkin math, and I could be wrong because it's just back of the napkin math, but the number that I've been throwing around is we need about 1,600 acres of solar installations in solar parks, which we could then feed into the Grand Rapids grid, and that would roughly displace all of our fossil fuel use. So it's doable. But that is a specifically engineered and calculated number, which is almost certainly wrong. That is my back-of-the-napkin math. I don't see anything in here that actually gets me from point A to point B. We can say we want to have people drive 20% less. Well, without any actual instantiated ways that I think that would actually happen. I mean, I would bet a lot of money. I'm the only person in this room who actually biked to work this morning. I would bet a fair amount of money that less than 20% of the people in this room drove with EVs. So if this is a very enlightened and very concerned environmental group up here, and it's a very environmentally concerned group of people sitting in the audience, and we're not anywhere close to those targets, I just think we have to have, I think this is one of the things that discredits the environmental movement. It was when you have goals that don't make any sense and don't possibly scale out, and when there's no breakdown or analysis of how you'd actually do it and what it would actually cost. This is sort of a butterflies and puppies moment, and I don't want to do that. I would love to have a discussion about specific items we could do, and there are some in here, to be fair. I mean, for example, residential composting, but when the composting section, there's a whole bunch of talk about neighborhood drop-off and all that. The city currently stops me composting in my backyard. If we could let me compost in my backyard, that's a whole lot better than having a truck come pick up my scraps or pick up my leaves. So there are great things we could do in the composting space. There are great things we can do in the EV charging space. There are great things we can do in the solar space. But I think that a document that frankly looks unbelievable to me, and I've done this stuff, and I want to do this stuff, and I'm concerned and committed, and I'm willing to talk about committing citizens' resources to it. I just think that this document is a cart it's a horse that's not even connected to the cart. And I think we have to first talk about the cart. We can't, I think passing this document and then saying, oh, from June to December, we'll figure out how to make this all make sense. Well, I think about this a lot, and I can't imagine how to make some of these goals make sense. That's where I am on it, folks. So I don't know if we want to, I guess I think reasonably we should have a pause on this. I don't want to vote against this, and I don't want to have a document that doesn't make engineering sense, that doesn't have any sense of viability to it. I think there are lots of good principles and lots of good aspirations here, but the problem is when you create an aspirational document that can't possibly be implemented. I mean, if you ask the median citizen of Grand Rapids, would you like your taxes to be zero? Probably the answer would be yes. I can't make that happen. I'm just not confident we can get anywhere close to making some of these goals happen. And I spend a lot of my time and energy trying to figure out how to deal with environmental issues. Commissioner Robbins.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. In full candor, too, I agree with a lot of what was just said. I guess I had a couple more pointed questions that it's okay if you don't have the information offhand, but so 197 actions, I guess. My first question is how many of those are compulsory versus an encouragement or an education opportunity to get people to buy in versus a top-down, do this or you're going to get fined? That's my first question. Second, exactly what Commissioner Perdue said. I want to know what the cost is of all these things. 197 actions. What is it going to cost the city? And if we're going to be putting, compulsory regulations on businesses and home builders in our community, what is it going to cost them as we implement this? And then lastly, just a principle. I think, this is an example to me of something that's very well intended, but has conflicting priorities. I think, we talk all the time about supporting our local business districts. So are we going to start adding, compliance requirements on top of that to mom and pop shops who, might want to help in this area, but don't have the resources to do that? And then are we going to fine them if we don't? And are we going to publish that information publicly so that people, can look at that? So it seems, I see the vision and the goal, but I think there's some conflicting priorities there. Also with housing, I think, as much as we talk about we need housing now as fast as possible, but we're going to require a significant portion that has to be done in a very certain way, jumping through additional hoops. So I think, like I said, it's well intended. I appreciate the work that's been done here, but I won't feel comfortable moving forward with this and implementing any of the actions until I have a better understanding of what exactly is compulsory and realistic, and then also just the cost it's gonna put on both the city and our taxpayers.
Thank you. Commissioner Knight.
So I guess, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, my kind of understanding of this, and I agree with some of the things that have been said, and some of the things that have been said I do not agree with. But just to be clear, it's almost like when we have our retreat in the fall, we look at all of our legislative priorities or the things that we are interested in, the things that we want to pursue, and then we begin to kind of hash those out and talk about what we're going to send forward to the state to have them begin to work on the things that we are interested in. So the way I'm seeing this document is these are some of the goals that have come forth out of the conversations and the meetings and the surveys and all the things that you've been doing, but it's not, I don't see this as things that we're going to say right now, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do this, this, and this. This goes forward now for us to have more conversation about what is actually actionable, like what can actually be done. How is it going to impact the community? How is it going to impact business, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess that's how I'm seeing what was just presented, that it's giving us an idea of some of the things that can happen. The reality of it, yeah, looking at it, is it going to happen tomorrow? Absolutely not. And in this current climate, is any of it going to happen? Come on, y'all. Like, we don't know what's going to happen in an hour, for real. So my thought is if you don't have a plan, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right? It's something to think about as we look at the future of our community and how we're going to move forward as a people. Again, none of this I see happening in the next year or 2 years, but there may be something. And then if it is, what does that look like? And how much money is going to be put into that? And where is that money going to come from? Is it coming out of the general fund? Is it coming out of taxes, bonds, whatever? I don't know, right? But this is kind of a framework of, because if we don't have a framework of anything, then we're just sitting here talking about stuff. And if I'm not mistaken, help me if I'm wrong, we've been talking about this for more than 2 years. Like 20?
Exactly.
Just throwing that out there.
Well, and thank you, Commissioner Knight, and I'll add on to that. I mean, you know, my problem is when you say goal, you know, if it's something that you can't reasonably tell me how are you going to do it, why are we even throwing it out there? I mean, I'm all in favor of, you know, trying to reduce our reliance on carbon fuel to produce electricity, but to say we're going to have an 80% reduction of our use of fossil fuels to produce electricity by 2030, like,
Mr. Mayor,
But if there's nothing out there for us to discuss, then how are we even going to do anything? Like,
I can provide a little clarification on the goals. So the goals that are more specific, like 80% electricity grid decarbonization by 2030, those goals were outlined through a science-based method with our consultant ICLEI, who performed our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So they helped us set those community-wide science-based targets that established what we needed to do to meet the Paris Climate Accords. And the goals that they establish are what we need to do to meet those community-wide science-based targets that are set. So those are more science-based from our consultant goals that were established. The strategies and actions are what we came up with to meet those goals.
sorry, so you're saying the Paris climate change would ask for this, and so that's science? I mean, I don't.
No, the analysis through the greenhouse gas emissions, sir. Inventory.
Well, so they think there's a plan to get us 80% off of fossil fuel for electric use in the next 5 years.
I think that
Love
there's
to
a
see
lot
the
of
documents.
mechanisms that we don't have. You're absolutely right. For electricity grid decarbonization, yes, we have investor-owned utilities within the city. It'll be a lot of communication with consumers' energy to understand how they're making progress towards their 2021 clean energy plan and goal, as well as continuing to advocate for those legislative changes with the Michigan Public Service Commission to actually make the changes that are necessary to see that move forward. I think, as we stress, this is a community-wide plan, and that we don't have necessarily all the answers because we need more people at the table in order to achieve this. But if we want to try and work towards community-wide science-based targets that we've established, we need to at least begin the process. As far as Commissioner Robbins, for your concerns, I can absolutely go back through and look at what is more advisory versus compulsory or encouraging incentives. That being said, I think you might be discussing a benchmarking and transparency ordinance language. Essentially, that's a best practice that's carried out across cities across the United States. There's a couple in Michigan, Ann Arbor, and Detroit. Those can be customized on if and how data is shared, so you might not necessarily have to share data. And also the best practice is that buildings are looked at with over 10,000 square feet, which is, I think for Grand Rapids, 42% of our total building emissions are from those bigger buildings. So to prevent equity from those mom and pop shops, that's a recommendation where we would start. But again, we're just focusing on really evaluating what that policy would look like right now legally.
Yeah, so I think I'm hearing, a lot here, and I understand. I would just offer a few things. So, one, I think it'll be good to have a public hearing on this. I want to caution us to not lose the momentum from very passionate experts within this field who have been looking forward to giving feedback. So that's just a note that I would sort of caution if we're going to move out the public hearing. There has been a lot of momentum here, and we know in modern times this is something hard to keep. It's hard to keep folks engaged and excited about things, and there is that engagement, excitement that's here, and I don't want to miss out on valuable voices. I do also agree with some of this does need to be more metered. I've shared with you, Annabelle, from the beginning of some of this is my word has been ambitious, right? And climate change is chugging along. It's not stopping, and we know that this is a true challenge. So yes, we have to have a metered approach, and we want to make sure our residents can have an accessible way into this movement. So yes, I am also concerned about smaller businesses, but at the same time, we do need to try to benchmark and see where we are as a city with some of these. So some of the ambitious goals, in my opinion, I would push to stay. Some of them, not all of them, but some of them need to stay so that we can have a benchmark and see where we're at, because climate change isn't stopping. So if we sort of get on a track of tampering the goal, even though we feel like we might miss it, that could also put us in some steps back, in my opinion. So I'm in agreement with, I think a lot of us are saying it needs to be more metered and have some more actionable ways. I also would like to echo, as someone who was on our urban agriculture committee, we have a whole list of possible ordinances that can be raised, right? Surrounding the composting. We did the backyard birds and chickens. So there are more, for lack of better words, low-hanging fruit that we can do with this. But I also, to be the second largest city in Michigan, I think we would be remiss to not have a few ambitious looking to the stars goals for this, because in turn, if we don't have some looking to the stars goals, then we are setting our communities back. So a metered approach, I'm looking forward to the retreat and getting even more into the nitty gritty on this.
Mr. Usasi.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Annabelle, and thank you for overviewing it. I agree. There is a lot here, but we also know that when we're dealing with community, the ideas and the issues around sustainability and climate change, I feel like I am not the expert at all. I kind of learned when I was first working at Cascade Engineering, but I was so ahead and now I'm behind. And so I think there's a lot here because there are a lot of different elements to take into consideration. I'm really, again, dismayed by some of the conversation today. So I'm sorry if you feel like this work was not appreciated, because that's kind of how I felt up here listening to some comments. I appreciate the work. I appreciate the work of the multiple departments who are also engaged with this work, just like equity. This is not something that is a cherry on top of, it's not one department. And I think that's been this balance of what are the resources that are needed. It is, you need resources inside the entire organization because it is a full stop strategy, not just this department over here. And so I think sometimes that's hard to recognize. I do think we're going to have to evaluate what are resources that might be taken away at the federal level. Because we have utilized grant funding both locally and federally to do this work, because quite honestly, this was not the work that those that created created cities and created the charter said that cities were going to do. So we've had to, with, different requirements in our budget of what we're supposed to do and what are we required by different proposals to figure out how we match money together. And so thank you for your department and others. I know Jennifer's in here as well. For finding those opportunities and also working with other departments to figure out how to make this work. I think that's why, for me, as we go through the budget process, I'm very interested in figuring out what are ways to reduce our costs overall. We've talked things, preparing for this meeting, thinking about the costs that we have associated with the district court that has just increased steadily. What if we could take some of that money and put it towards, some of these efforts? What if we could put it towards more public safety? So I am sitting here a little dismayed by some of the comments, but also energized by your knowledge and your foresight, and then those that have been in the community doing this. I think you bring up a good point, Commissioner Kilgore. Essentially, a plan like this fits into the other plans that we have into the city, right? So in the ones that you highlighted, our economic development and our equitable economic development and mobile GR plan, the plans that we have around community development, plans that we have related to the zoning pieces that we'll take up. All of those needs to be considered. So I think sometimes we're trying to boil the ocean, I don't know, whatever it is. And this is the lofty plan, and I think that it should have those pieces. I think it is good to push ourselves. I think it is good to figure out what we need to do. I can't afford an electric vehicle. I need to purchase a vehicle for my husband. He rides his electric bike to work, so I don't, Mayor, because you can't ride it with nylons, and women are still expected to look a certain way as elected officials. But I need to get a vehicle, and I'm probably not going to be able to purchase a new vehicle for him. I don't get a stipend from the city. And so I need to look at everything that is in front of me to make those decisions, and this is very personal. So I think the city has always said, what can we do individually? Because we're not going to ask anybody else to do something that we're not willing to do. So that's the first piece. It's much like how we saw, I think, affirmative action play out in the 90s. There was a lot of voluntary efforts that organizations did and said, we're going to show what's possible, and then we're going to ask people to sort of evaluate themselves and to regulate themselves a little bit. I would agree with some of my colleagues' comments. Like, I think we have to balance what is punitive versus carrot. I'm not really interested in a lot of punitive efforts at this point, especially for small businesses. When we see small businesses who are challenged by just like maintaining with inflation and employee issues. So I think we have to be clear about that, and that's something I'd be supportive. I don't see that, and that would also have to be something that would have to come back to this body. So let's remind ourselves that's what the work is. You get a plan, you review it. How does it come into plans? How does it feed into different committees? How does it come from, say, an urban agriculture committee? How does it come from urban forestry? And then, a number of these things, that we had on our legislative agenda, there were things on the legislative agenda that I didn't agree with. I didn't necessarily think we needed EV charging stations at rest stops. But did I support it because others did? Yes, because it was this bigger, lofty goal. So the item before us today is to approve a time for there to be a hearing. So I will be supporting that motion. Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Sassi, I'll explain rain gear to you after the meeting, maybe, because you can get waterproof clothes to wear over your clothes. So as far as the goals go here, again, my concern is not that we don't work on environmental issues. I mean, I think everyone in the city understands that I'm very concerned about working on density and walkability and bikeability. But I am really uncomfortable with saying, for example, we have a goal that we would commit ourselves to a goal of all residential buildings, new residential buildings be electrified immediately. If we pass something that says that's our goal, well, we could pass city code that says that that's going to happen immediately. If that's our goal and it's entirely inside of our power, then we've committed ourselves to a plan which requires us right now to require that all new construction in town only use electricity as their source. Yeah?
My apologies. We don't have control over that. The Michigan state legislature has control over the energy code. So that's something that, again, we'd have to advocate for the changes for potential adoptions of new international.
Well, we could do it in our building code.
The building code is set at the state level. And then our codes follow what the Michigan state legislature sets out.
Okay. So again, then are we going to be going to Lansing immediately and advocating that we go to an all-electric new residential construction? I think that's something that's going to have to be really talked about. And again, this comes down to having the cart in front of the horse. Like I would love to have a conversation about none of this stuff's in our legislative agenda at this point, for example. So I think that I really do not think that this is worked out with goals that aren't aspirational but that are achievable, and that's my central concern. So I just don't think that these goals are ripe yet for consideration and a vote.
Mayor, so thank you all. This has probably been one of the most robust discussion days that we've had since this dais has been seated, since 2 weeks ago. No, this is actually really good feedback. Thank you, and I say that with all sincerity. It really helps us know what the preferences and priorities are across the dais. And some of this is no surprise to me. Some of you had shared your concerns prior to the meeting. I did pass that on to staff, so we appreciate the candor in sharing it publicly. I want to just go back to what I heard a couple times about process. And that's that's the reason why it's on the agenda today, not because I, as staff are ready to wholeheartedly adopt what's in, but because we're honoring the process, the community engaged process that started some time ago, prior to some of you being on the dais. And what I want to offer is a couple of things as part of the process. We can continue as recommended, bringing this forward for a public hearing, getting feedback from the community, and there's no urgency to adopt the first meeting in May if there's additional feedback from this body to make changes to the proposed plan. And that's part of the process. You want to hear from the community, then I want to hear from commission, give staff some direction. We go back. If you say 197 action items are too many, we can find ways to distill, collaborate, consolidate, much like the clerk did in the precinct merger options. The second is an other alternative, and we've not done this before. What I hear us saying is if we want to be transparent with community and put before them what the commission's priorities are prior to the public hearing, that would require more time, because we'd have to workshop this several more times to get your feedback, and then put something before the public for their feedback before your final decision. So I just wanted to offer that in terms of process. I'm agnostic on either one. I want to know what the preference of the commission is.
So I don't know if we got sentiment. I think maybe this calls for sentiment from the commission. Go ahead, Commissioner Kohler.
Thank you, Mayor. I earlier said I do believe we need to jump on the energy that folks have in this community around this plan. They've been waiting, they've engaged with the community master plan, and now it's sort of like itching to give us feedback, which is rare. So I do think, as the city manager said, now we can do that, go to the hearing, and then get into the nitty-gritty. That's what I would propose, and I would hope that you all would support.
Mayor, I appreciate the conversation. I have shared with city manager on multiple occasions that my frustration with some of our plans being so just plan idea-centric and not enough around the nitty-gritty of what it would mean to implement, which is why I have the line of questioning that I do. That being said, I don't think we've given this level of rigor and judgment to any of the plans that have come before us, and I think this, you use the word, there's a lot of ambitious items in here. But this is ambitious work. Like, this is a new phase of work for our entire globe, right? Like, no exaggeration. And so it needs to have some ambitious goals in there. And just like with any other plan, as you dive into it, you will see this is realistic, this is not. And a lot of the policy-related ones that are on a local level will come to us for approval. The budget-related items will come to us for approval. So there's still lots of opportunities to shape the actual implementation and the prioritization and the timeline. So I do share, some frustrations with, gosh, I really wish we could get a little bit more nitty-gritty and understand that plans like this are often the very first step in the process. And I do appreciate all the engagement, but all the research and deep dive into data and science that went into this. And so I want to move forward with hosting the public hearing. I would ask if we might, ahead of that, put together some sketch that outline some of the big buckets we talked about, whether it's what's education versus advisory versus compulsory, those buckets, and/or if it's not too much of a lift, also be able to identify what's administrative, which is what is programmatic. I think that will be helpful for us here to kind of see that there is some teeth here, as well as allow this process to move forward. So I'll be in support of moving this to public hearing, but we'll like a little bit more information in the in-between time.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. In the interest of process, I'm happy to see this go forward to public hearing to get some insight from people in the community. I think I would hope to see answers to some of those questions I passed along prior to then. I think that would be great. And yeah, as written, I mean, what's being presented to us and now to public hearing, I think I do have some concerns that I wouldn't feel comfortable moving forward with in the end. But if there is the opportunity to refine some of those and hear specifically what's compulsory, that's where a lot of my concerns lie, specifically around what we're strong arming versus educating, encouraging. But in the interest of process, I'm happy to still move this forward to a public hearing.
Yeah, thank you. Any other comments? Mr. Belcheck.
I just wanted to weigh in. I've been listening to everyone very carefully. There is a lot of excitement and a lot of conversation around this for some time. I have been in contact with the GR Climate Coalition on multiple occasions. They've asked what my thoughts are on it. I said I'm interested in continuing the conversation, and of course, reading the whole plan is a big lift. So I do think that the conversation and the thoughts that I personally have are around what is the measure of success we are establishing for our community. We can set these aspirational goals, and maybe that's just a word change that we need to list, the aspirational goal versus the actual metrics we're going to hit. You know, is it 100% of that goal achieved that is going to be considered success? Is it 80%? Is it just significant progress? What does significant progress looks like? Because that's what we're going to be held accountable for when the community looks at the dashboard or looks at us and says, you didn't do your job. And I want us to consider, we have to have GR Climate Coalition and the many, many partners in that, the C4 Coalition, all the people that are not in this room right now that have had these conversations. Where is their responsibility and the measure of success? What is realistic? So I think that this is, again, about refining and really looking at what can we do at the city level and what's incumbent upon the partners, the private sector, the community, especially if we want to consider that I think we're in a world where we have to think bottom up. And I don't know if we've all embraced that entirely. And I think that goes back to what's happening at the federal level as much as we have to do things at the local level. And I do think we need to think about money, but we have to think about, is it realistic from money, from progress, all these different angles. So I think we should move this forward for a public comment, public hearing, as I was trying to say with the other plan and about precincts, and we need to continue this. But we are going to have to set goals as a commission in our retreat and elsewhere, in our legislative agenda and elsewhere, where we say, we're only going to tackle these 10 things. We can't do all 197. Right. And where is it up to the rest of the community to pick up? And we need commitments, and maybe we need letters of agreement and things like that, where we have contractual memorandums of understanding.
Thanks, Commissioner. And so let me be clear. I'm going to vote in favor of moving this forward, too. My concern here, and my real central concern is, if you set goals which are not realistically meetable, and then you just don't make them, but you don't, it's sort of like in politics, sometimes people say a half loaf is better than none. Well, if you set a goal of a whole loaf and then you do virtually nothing, and you can just say, oh, well, it didn't work out. I mean, I lived through trying to get I put a lot of work into trying to get large-scale wind turbines at the end of M45 20 years ago, and it didn't happen. And since then, we've been trying to get solar on Butterworth, and that's been going on for 20 years. And I put solar panels on my house in 2010, and I'm still the only person on my block with solar panels on their roof. So I am concerned that if we don't have actual instantiated, realistic plans for progress on the issue of climate change and on actually getting renewable things done, then we will quietly fail at a plan that is too aspirational and not instantiated enough. And that's my concern. Not that I don't want to get there, but I would much rather have a plan that we can say is realistic and achievable. And also the other concern, and this is Commissioner Robbins' point, it's sort of in democracy, it's always a risk to vote in cost on somebody else. And so if we, for example, imposed a lot of costs on owners of commercial buildings, well, okay, they may not live in the city, they may not vote in the city, and changing, as we see at the federal level, changing rules on people dramatically overnight can create really, really chaotic costs. So again, this is something I think we need to discuss. We need to be careful about instantiating, and if we have goals, we really have ways that we can expect to implement them. Now, I also think a lot of these community engagement ideas are always a great idea. So, for example, in EVs. EVs are the cheapest vehicles I've ever owned, and Commissioner Isasi says she couldn't afford one. I think that explaining to people in the community that they're actually affordable. Lots of used EVs are incredibly affordable right now. I sold my last one for $8,000. So I think that explaining to people that EVs are actually affordable and actually are very, very low cost to maintain, those are great conversations to have, and we should be having those community education conversations. So I'm not saying I'm opposed to those either. My concern is that we maximize our opportunity for success and for progress on environmental issues. So I am in favor of moving us forward. And if some of my comments sounded unduly negative, I apologize. My concern is simply that we maximize our opportunity for progress. So I call for a vote to move this forward, if there's no further discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And I'd like to ask for a roll call vote to move into closed session immediately following.
So moved.
City Clerk? Oh, sorry. Support?
Support.
Commissioner Belcheck,
Yes.
Commissioner Purdue,
Yes.
Commissioner Sassi,
Yes.
Commissioner Kilgore,
Yes.
Commissioner Knight,
Yes.
Commissioner Robbins.
Yes.
Mayor LaGrand.
Yes.
601 Law Library? Where's it at, Phil?